She sat across from him after 10 years of silence, and what she said next destroyed everything he thought he'd built his life for. A billionaire who gave up love for success. A woman who raised their daughter alone in the dark. One dinner that was never supposed to happen. And a secret 9 years in the making that will shatter every wall he ever built around his heart. If this story moves you, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The reservation was for 8 o'clock. Ethan Calloway arrived at 7:43. Not because he was eager. He hadn't been eager about anything that didn't involve a quarterly earnings report in longer than he could honestly remember. He arrived early because punctuality was the one social habit he'd managed to preserve through 12 years of building something from almost nothing, and because his assistant Marcus had booked the table under a fake name to avoid the kind of press attention that turned a private dinner into tomorrow morning's business column. He stood at the entrance of Aurelius, 51 floors above Midtown Manhattan, and let the maitre d' take his coat without really noticing the man's face. The restaurant smelled like money. Not new money, not the kind that announced itself, but the quiet, settled kind that didn't need to. Cedar and white truffle and something floral he couldn't name. The kind of place where conversations happened in half voices and nobody looked directly at anyone else. He followed the host through a room of well-dressed strangers to a corner table near the floor-to-ceiling glass panels that opened onto the rooftop terrace. The city spread out below them like something out of a dream. 10 million lit windows, the East River catching the last copper light of the evening, the Brooklyn Bridge stitched against a purple sky. Ethan sat down and looked at none of it. He pulled out his phone instead. 41 unread messages, 7 missed calls, 3 from his CFO, Richard Holt, 2 from his head of legal, 1 from the board's lead independent director, Patricia Wynn, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize with a 212 area code and no saved name. He put the phone face down on the white tablecloth. One evening, Marcus had said, when Ethan had tried to cancel for the 3rd time, "You promised your sister one evening, Ethan. That's it. Go, be a human being for 2 hours, and then you can go back to destroying yourself in peace." His sister Claire had arranged this. Claire, who still called him every Sunday and always asked 2 questions in exactly the same order. First about his daughter Sophie, then about whether he was seeing anyone. The first question he could answer easily. The second one he'd been deflecting since 2019. He was 32 years old. He ran a technology company valued at somewhere north of $4 billion, depending on the day and the market's mood. He had a 9-year-old daughter who drew pictures of robots on the back of his presentation folders and once told her teacher that her dad's job was making computers think. He lived in a duplex penthouse on the Upper West Side that had cost more than some small country's annual infrastructure budgets, and he ate breakfast standing up over the kitchen island at 5:45 every morning before Sophie woke up, because it was the only time he had to himself. He had not been on a date in 16 months. He had not been on a date that mattered, genuinely, heart-level mattered, in 10 years. One more, he'd told Claire, and he'd meant it the way people mean things when they've already decided. One more, and then I'm done trying. I'll be fine. Sophie and I are fine. Claire had heard the tiredness under the words and said nothing, just texted him the details and added 3 heart emojis at the end, which was her way of saying she disagreed but loved him anyway. A waiter appeared and asked if he'd like to start with still or sparkling water. "Still," Ethan said, "and give me a few minutes before the menu." He needed a few minutes. He'd been in back-to-back meetings since 7 that morning, a product roadmap review, a call with their Singapore engineering team, a tense lunch with 2 of their biggest institutional investors who'd been asking pointed questions about the company's next phase of growth, and then a 40-minute call with his board chair that he'd had to step out of early to get here on time. The company was called Callaway Systems. It had started as a predictive analytics platform for mid-sized logistics companies, the kind of unsexy, invisible infrastructure work that nobody wrote magazine profiles about until suddenly everybody wanted to. Now it was something larger and harder to describe simply: enterprise AI infrastructure, supply chain intelligence, automated decision architecture, the kind of technology that sat in the walls of industries and made things run without anyone seeing it happening. Forbes had called him quietly unstoppable in a profile 2 years ago. He'd read the piece once, on a flight to Tokyo, and thought mostly about the word quietly, which had felt more accurate than the writer probably intended. He was quiet. He was private. He was, if he was being honest with himself, which he found increasingly difficult, lonely in a way that he'd gotten so used to carrying that he'd almost stopped noticing the weight of it. Almost. He picked up his phone again. Richard Holt had now called a fourth time. The unknown 212 number had called back. 3 new texts from his head of legal, the last one flagged urgent with a red exclamation point. He was about to unlock the screen when he heard the host's voice at the edge of his awareness, that particular polished tone of someone guiding a guest toward their table, and something in Ethan shifted, a kind of atmospheric change, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. And he looked up. And the world he'd spent 10 years constructing around himself went very, very still. She was wearing a dark green dress that looked like it cost less than the appetizers on the menu and somehow made every other woman in the room look overdressed. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. She used to wear it long, past her shoulders, and he used to watch it catch the light when she walked. Now it was cut just below her jaw, and it made her look older in the way that suited her, the way that time suits certain people who let it. She was talking to the host, nodding at something he said, and she hadn't seen Ethan yet. She was looking around the room with the kind of careful attention he recognized, the attention of someone who is always calculating the cost of their surroundings, always slightly aware of not quite belonging. He'd known that look once. He'd loved that look once. Then she found the table. Then she found him. And Lena Brooks stopped walking. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, long enough for Ethan to see the exact moment recognition hit her, the way her expression went from polite social readiness to something he couldn't fully name, not anger, not happiness, something older and more complicated than either, something that looked, if he was being honest, like a door she'd spent a long time closing, slamming back open. Then she moved again, and the host pulled out the chair across from him, and she sat down, and she looked at him across a table that suddenly felt approximately the width of a decade. "Ethan," she said. Just his name. The way she said it. Not a question, not an accusation, not a greeting exactly, just the fact of him, named. "Lena." His voice came out steadier than he deserved. A pause. The kind that has weight. "I didn't know it was you," she said. "I didn't know it was you either." She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her deciding something. Then she let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Claire," she said. "Claire," he confirmed. Another pause. The waiter materialized, poured water into both glasses, vanished with the discretion of someone very well trained. "She's your sister," Lena said. "She is. She's my client." A beat. "She hired my firm to design the renovation for her place in Brooklyn Heights. We've been working together for about 6 months. She picked up her water glass. She never mentioned having a brother named Ethan Calloway. She probably knew I'd cancel if I found out anything about who I was meeting. Lena looked at him over the rim of her glass. She knew the same about me, she said, and there was something in her tone that was dry and sad and precise all at once. How long has she been planning this? I'm going to guess, Lena said slowly, longer than either of us is going to be comfortable with. Ethan almost smiled. It caught him off guard. The almost smile. He hadn't been caught off guard in a while. They opened the menus. They didn't read them. They were both staring at the page with the focused non-focus of two people buying themselves time to think. You look good, Ethan said finally, because it was true, and because something had to break the silence. You look tired, Lena said. He blinked. Sorry, she said, not sounding particularly sorry. I didn't mean... She stopped. Actually, I did mean it. You do look tired. I'm always tired. You weren't always. The words landed softly. He felt them anyway. They ordered. Ethan couldn't have said afterward what he'd ordered. Something with fish, he thought. Lena asked the waiter 3 questions about the menu with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd trained herself to know what she was paying for, and he remembered that about her. The careful way she'd always engaged with anything that involved money. Not anxious, exactly. More like someone who'd learned early that carelessness about small things had a way of becoming large problems. Your sister told me you have a daughter, Lena said, once the waiter had gone. Sophie, the way her name always came out of him, immediate, involuntary, like a reflex. She's 9. Something moved across Lena's face. So fast he almost missed it. What's she like? Relentless, he said. And then, because that wasn't enough, and Lena had asked like she actually wanted to know, she reads everything, every label, every sign, every random document she finds on my desk. She corrected a typo in one of my board presentations once. She was 7. She's obsessed with how things are built, how systems work, why things are the way they are. He paused. She asks questions I can't answer, all the time. That sounds difficult. It's the best part of my life, he said, and he meant it without performance, without the careful calibration he usually applied to anything personal. It just came out true. Lena watched him. And her mother? The table went quiet in a different way. We weren't together, he said. It was brief. She moved abroad when Sophie was 2. We have an arrangement, a good one, I think, for Sophie, but Sophie lives with me. Has since she was 3. Lena nodded slowly, and he could see her processing it without judgment, filing it away. You said Claire hired your firm, he said. Your architectural firm. Brooks Design Studio. She said it without pride and without false modesty. Just the plain fact of it. I started it 7 years ago. 4 people now, including me. We do residential work mostly. Some commercial projects. Historic renovations. She looked at the table for a moment. Nothing that ends up in magazines. But it's yours. It's mine. She looked up. The way she said it. The quiet ownership in it. Where are you based? Brooklyn. Red Hook. She picked up her fork, put it back down. I grew up in Brownsville. I don't know if you... I know, he said. Yeah, you told me. She looked at him. You remember that? I remember most things, he said carefully. About back then. The words were careful and useless at the same time. There were things that needed saying, and they were circling them the way you circle something hot, close enough to feel the heat, not close enough to pick it up yet. How did you... he started. Architecture school, she said, anticipating the question. CCNY. I got a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. Graduated in 2017. Worked at a firm in Queens for 3 years. Saved enough to start my own. She said it all plainly, without expecting praise or sympathy. Just the sequence of things. It was hard. It was also fine. I made it work. You always did, he said quietly. Something in her expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed in a way he couldn't categorize. And you, she said. Her voice was careful now, too. Callaway Systems. You know about it. Everyone knows about it. She said it without warmth or coldness. You're in the news a fair amount. I try not to be. You're not great at that. He exhaled. No. The Forbes piece called you a rare example of vision without ego, she said. I read it. On a bus. I almost laughed. I was pretty close to laughing myself. Are you? She tilted her head slightly. Without ego? He considered it honestly. Less than I used to be, he said. More than I should be, probably. It's... He stopped. Building something that size does things to your self-perception. You start to think that because something happened, it was always going to happen. Like the outcome was inevitable. It wasn't. None of it was inevitable. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. No, she agreed softly. None of it was. The food arrived. They ate for a while without talking, and it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had once known each other well enough that not every moment needed to be filled, even across a decade of distance. His phone buzzed on the table. He didn't look at it. It buzzed again. And again. He flipped it over. 8 new messages. Richard's name 3 times. Patricia Wynne once. 2 he didn't recognize. He put it face down again. You don't have to, Lena started. I do, actually, he said. Have to ignore it. Just for tonight. She looked at him for a moment. That sounds like someone trying to convince themselves. It's someone trying to be present, he said. For once. Something in her expression shifted again, smaller this time, but real. The starter plates were cleared. A second glass of wine appeared for each of them. Outside, the city had gone from copper and purple to the full dark of late evening, all glass and light and movement, the bridges lit like jewelry thrown against black water. "I have to ask you something," Ethan said. "Okay. And I need you to know I'm not asking because I want an argument. I'm asking because I've thought about it for—" He stopped. "A long time." Lena set down her wine glass. "Ask." "When I left," he said. "Do you understand why?" She was quiet for a moment. "I understood what you told me," she said finally. "I'm not sure I ever understood why." He nodded. The distinction was important. He'd always known she was smart enough to know the difference. "I was 22, he said. "I had a prototype and some code and about $6,000 and a head full of ideas that felt like they were going to crack apart if I didn't act on them immediately. And I was—" He searched for the word. "I was terrified. Of not becoming something, of running out of time, of getting stuck," she said quietly. He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I know what you were afraid of. You were afraid that love was a thing that would anchor you in place, and you'd watch the rest of your life go by from the same spot." She said it without bitterness, just with the precision of someone who'd had 10 years to understand a thing. "I just wasn't sure back then why I had to be the anchor." The words hit him somewhere specific and real. He didn't deflect them. "You weren't," he said. "I was wrong about that. You weren't. That's not what you were. But you acted like I was." "Yes." She absorbed that. "Did it help?" she asked. "Leaving. Did it get you what you thought it would?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always thought about the company, without sentiment, just data. "In some ways," he said, "the company is real. The things we built are real. There are people whose businesses run better, whose supply chains cost less, whose systems actually function, because of what we built. That's real." He turned his wine glass slowly in his fingers. "But there's another part of the answer that I don't really know how to give at a dinner table." "Try," she said. He looked up at her. She was watching him the way she used to, with that particular Lena Brooks attention that didn't let you get away with the easier version of a thing. "I spent the first 4 years building something that kept me from thinking about anything except the next problem," he said. "And then Sophie came and I had someone I was doing it for, which helped. It made the work feel justified, like it had a point. But there were—" He stopped. "There were nights, a lot of them, where I'd sit in that apartment and look at something we'd just built, something genuinely new, and I'd feel, I don't know, like I was explaining a joke to someone who wasn't there." Lena didn't say anything. She just listened. "Some of the things I built," he said slowly, "some of the core ideas, the underlying philosophy of the system, the way I thought about connection and structure and—" He stopped again. "We talked about a city once. Do you remember? We were on that roof in Harlem, the summer before you left," she finished. "Before I left. We were talking about what cities really were, what they were trying to do, whether cities were just a technology for allowing people to be close to each other without colliding. And you said—" "I said they were load-bearing loneliness," she said quietly. He stared at her. "I remember," she said. "That phrase," he said, "that exact phrase. It's in the original design document for our core architecture, word for word, attributed to—" He exhaled. "I wrote inspired by a conversation with someone smarter than me." Which was cowardly and also true. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It had something live in it, something that had been waiting a long time to stop being ignored. "Ethan," she said, and her voice was quieter now, lower. "I need to tell you something." His phone exploded. 6 buzzes in rapid succession. He didn't move. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her fingers were around her wine glass, but she wasn't drinking. She was looking at him with that expression he still couldn't categorize, the one that had been on her face in various forms since she sat down. Something complicated, something old and heavy and approaching a point. "Not yet," she said softly. "I need—" Just a few more minutes. Before. Before what? Before everything changes, she said. And something in the way she said it, quiet and certain and a little sad, made him put his phone in his jacket pocket without looking at it. Okay, he said. The terrace had grown quieter as the evening wore on. 2 tables near them had cleared, and a soft wind was coming in off the river, cooler now, carrying the smell of the city, concrete and exhaust, and something metallic and alive, the particular smell of a place that never completely stops being itself. Lena had ordered coffee. Ethan hadn't. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Outside, a helicopter moved across the sky. A small light, deliberate, cutting from west to east. I've thought about telling you this, she said, in probably 100 different versions over the last 9 years. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the city below. Every time I decided not to, I had a reason. Some of the reasons were good. Some of them were just easier to live with than the truth. Ethan was very still. When you left, she said, She stopped. Started again, more carefully. It took me a long time to understand what had happened. I kept thinking I'd misread it, that there was an explanation. I called you. You know that. You didn't answer. I know, he said. I know I didn't. I stopped after a while. She looked at the cup. I found out I was pregnant about 3 weeks after the last time I tried to reach you. The word landed like something dropped from a height. I was 23, she continued. I was working 2 jobs and living with a roommate in a 1-bedroom in Flatbush. I had no family money, no savings to speak of, and the person I would have called first, she stopped. Wasn't available. Ethan's voice, when it came out, was barely a sound. Lena, I'm not telling you this so you feel guilty, she said quickly. Not defensive, practical. I made decisions. I made them deliberately. I chose to have her, and I chose to raise her, and I chose... She finally looked at him. I chose not to tell you, because by then you were becoming something. The company was starting, and I genuinely believed that I'd already had the answer, that you'd chosen the work, that adding a baby to that equation wasn't... She exhaled. I didn't want to be the reason you came back if you didn't want to come back. I didn't want a check. I didn't want obligation wearing the face of someone I used to... She stopped. What's her name? Ethan said. His voice was very flat. Not flat from coldness, but flat from the effort of holding himself together. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Maya, she said. He said it back, just once, under his breath, like testing the weight of it. Maya. She's 9 years old, Lena said. She'll be 10 in March. She's healthy. She was healthy. A pause. A pause with something specific in it. She's been sick, recently. It started in January. Lena's composure, which had been something remarkable up to this point, developed a fracture. Just a small one, around the eyes. She has a condition affecting her bone marrow, aplastic anemia. It's treatable, the doctors think. They're optimistic, they say. But they're doing a full genetic workup, medical history, both parents. Ethan's whole body had gone still in a way that was different from stillness, like a system shutting down non-essential processes. That's why you're here tonight, he said. I'm here tonight because Claire arranged it, and I thought... She stopped, pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose for a moment. I thought it was a coincidence until about 30 seconds after I sat down and started doing math. She looked at him. But yes, I needed to find you, not only because of the medical history, because... Her voice dropped. She's been asking about her father for a long time, and I've been running out of answers that don't feel like lies. The city outside was indifferent and enormous and lit in a million colors, and Ethan Calloway sat at a table 51 floors above it and felt the architecture of the last 10 years of his life make a sound like something structural giving way. I have a daughter, he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just saying it out loud because the only way he was going to believe it was if he heard it in his own voice. Yes, Lena said. She's 9. Yes. She's sick. Lena's jaw tightened. She's being treated. She's Maya. She's... And then for the first time that evening, Lena's voice broke, just slightly, just for a moment. She's extraordinary, Ethan. You have no idea. He looked at her. He looked at the woman who had been 23 years old, alone, no safety net, no resources, and had built a life anyway. Had built a person, apparently an actual human being, out of the wreckage of something he'd walked away from without looking back. Every billion-dollar decision he'd ever made, every pivot, every acquisition, every late-night call that changed the direction of $100 million in revenue, none of them felt like the hardest thing in this restaurant right now. His phone was ringing inside his jacket pocket, vibrating against his chest, long and insistent, the pattern of an urgent call that someone was making repeatedly. He didn't move. "Where is she?" he said. Lena looked at him carefully. "What?" "Right now. Where is Maya right now?" "At the hospital. NYU Langone. My neighbor is with her. She was stable when I left." He stood up. He wasn't sure exactly when the decision had been made, whether it was when Lena said the name, or when she said sick, or when she said she's extraordinary in that voice that cracked just slightly. But it was made, and there was no part of him that was going to sit at a rooftop table and finish his fish and pretend that the world was the same shape it had been 20 minutes ago. He reached into his jacket and took out his phone. 19 missed calls. Richard Holt, Patricia Wynn, his head of legal. Numbers he didn't recognize. A text from his board chair that read, in full, "Ethan, this is not optional. Call me now." He turned the screen off. "Let's go," he said. Lena stared at him. "Ethan, I want to meet her," he said. His voice was not steady exactly, but certain. "I want to meet my daughter." Something moved across Lena's face. Something that had been held at a distance for a long time, keeping itself from being real. "It's not," she started. "It's complicated. She doesn't know. I haven't told her." "I know," he said. "I know it's complicated. I know I don't have any right to hit." He stopped, pressed his palms flat against the table for a moment. "Lena, I understand that I forfeited the easy version of this the minute I didn't pick up the phone 10 years ago. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking to go to a hospital and be in the same room as a 9-year-old who is sick and who is apparently mine, and I'm asking you to let me start there." He held her gaze. "Please." The last word came out rough, less polished than anything else he'd said all night. Lena looked at him for a long, measuring moment, looking for the angles, looking for the performance, looking for the escape hatch, the way she'd always been able to see through the surface of a thing to whatever was holding it up. She found something she hadn't expected to find. She found that he meant it. "I need to pay for..." "I've got it," he said. "Go get your coat." The elevator ride down was silent in the way that only elevators can make silence. That small, suspended quiet of a box moving through space, holding two people who had too many things to say and the wrong geometry to say them in. They came out onto 57th Street. The night air hit them both. Cabs and ride shares and the sound of the city at full volume after the muffled elegance of the restaurant above. Ethan flagged a cab without calling his driver, say, something about that felt right. The ordinary black cab, the normal door, the vinyl seat, and the Yankee air freshener swinging from the mirror. He gave the driver the address, NYU Langone, East 33rd Street. They sat in the back of the cab without touching, 6 inches of vinyl seat between them, watching the city scroll past the windows. 57th to 56th to 55th. The traffic was heavy but moving. The driver had the radio on low, some talk station, a voice discussing interest rates. "She's really smart," Lena said, not looking at him, just looking at the street, quietly, like she was thinking out loud. "Maya, she's already reading things I don't fully understand. She loves buildings. She told me once that buildings were just," her exact words were, "stories that people walk through." She was 7 when she said that. Something happened in Ethan's chest. Something that didn't have a good word attached to it yet. "She sounds like you," he said. "She sounds like..." Lena stopped. Didn't finish. She sounds like both of us, he said. Lena was quiet for a moment, then very quietly. Yes. Sometimes. Yes. The cab hit a red light at 48th. Ethan looked out his window at the neon and the foot traffic and the ordinary chaos of a city at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday and thought about a 9-year-old girl in a hospital room who had apparently inherited his family's gift for building things and her mother's gift for seeing what those things were actually for. He thought about 9 years of birthdays he hadn't known to count. He thought about the word dad and what it meant to Sophie, and how Sophie had once told him, in the specific brutal honesty of children, "I think I love you more than I love anyone, but you're also kind of bad at being a person." He had not disagreed. His phone vibrated again. He took it out. Richard Holt. "I need you to call me in the next 10 minutes, or I am going to the board without you." He typed back, "I know what's happening. I'll call you tomorrow." Richard. "That's not—" He put the phone away. The light changed. The cab moved forward. The city kept going the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of lives that had nothing to do with him. And Ethan sat in the back of a yellow cab and felt, for the first time in 10 years, that he was moving towards something instead of always moving away. Lena's hands were in her lap. He looked at them, at the small calluses he could see even in the moving light, at the way she held herself, always slightly compact, like she'd learned to take up the least possible space in a world that hadn't given her much to work with. "I'm sorry," he said. She turned to look at him. "Not—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I'm not saying it because I think it fixes anything. I know it doesn't. I know I don't get credit for being sorry. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've been not saying it for a decade, and because—" He exhaled. "Because you raised a kid who is apparently remarkable, alone, while building a business, and the fact that you're sitting in this cab right now instead of telling me to go to hell is something I genuinely don't deserve." Lena looked at him for a long moment. "I've thought about telling you to go to hell," she admitted. "I know. Many times. I know. Including twice tonight." The edge of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Which twice?" "When you said you remembered things about back then," she said. "And when you told me I always made things work." A pause. "Because you don't get to remember things fondly when you're the one who left." "That's fair," he said. "And also," she said, and her voice dropped slightly, and some of the sharpness went out of it, "when you said Sophie was the best part of your life," she looked back out the window. "Because you were right. And because I understand exactly what that feels like. And because that, the way you said it, was the first time tonight I believed that maybe you were actually different now." The cab turned onto 33rd Street. The hospital was 2 blocks ahead. "I'm still figuring out how to be different," he said quietly. I don't want to tell you I'm a changed man and hand you some kind of package. I still work 80 hours a week. I still find it easier to solve a business problem than to sit with an emotion. I'm not good at this part. This part. The human part," he said. "The present part." Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the hospital entrance coming up on their right. "Maya," she said quietly, "is very good at demanding the present part." The cab stopped. Ethan reached forward and paid the driver and opened the door and stepped out onto East 33rd Street, and above them the hospital building rose against the night sky, all glass and institutional light, and somewhere inside it there was a 9-year-old girl with his eyes and her mother's way of seeing the world. And she was sick, and she was asking questions, and she was waiting. He held the door. Lena got out. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city moving around them the way it always did. "What do I say to her?" he asked. His voice, for the first time all evening, was genuinely uncertain, not performing uncertainty, actually not knowing. Lena looked at him. "Start with her name," she said. "She'll take it from there." They walked through the hospital doors together. The hospital lobby at 9:30 on a Tuesday night had a particular kind of quiet that wasn't really quiet at all. It was the sound of machines and rubber soles on linoleum and the low, controlled voices of people trained to sound calm, regardless of what was happening behind the doors they stood in front of. The overhead lights were the color of old paper, and everything smelled like antiseptic and the ghost of something floral that someone had tried to spray over it. Ethan walked through the automatic doors and felt the temperature drop 7 degrees and felt, underneath that, something else drop too. Something internal, some last remnant of the version of this evening he'd constructed in his head before he'd looked up from a restaurant table and seen Lena Brooks standing 20 feet away from him in a green dress. That version of the evening was gone. Whatever came next was operating without a script. Lena moved with purpose through the lobby, the way people move through spaces they've learned by necessity. Not rushing, but direct, no wasted motion. She'd been here before. Many times, by the look of it. She knew which elevator bank, which floor, which turn to take at the end of the corridor without reading the signs. Ethan followed her and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say and he was smart enough to know it. The elevator opened on the 7th floor, pediatric oncology and hematology. The words on the sign above the nurses' station were printed in a font that was trying to be friendly and not quite managing it. A woman was sitting in a chair outside one of the rooms down the hall. Middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing a jacket with paint on the sleeve, reading something on her phone with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked up when she saw Lena and stood immediately, and something passed between the two women that was entirely wordless and entirely sufficient. "She was awake about 20 minutes ago," the woman said quietly. "Asking for you, then she fell back asleep." She glanced at Ethan with the frank, assessing look of someone who wasn't going to pretend she hadn't noticed him standing there. "I'll get out of your way." "Thank you, Donna," Lena said. "Seriously, I'll call you tomorrow." Donna gave Ethan one more look, not hostile, just observing, and walked toward the elevator with the unhurried pace of someone who had done a favor without being asked and didn't require anything in return. Ethan looked at the closed door of the hospital room. "She's asleep," Lena said. She was standing slightly in front of him, not blocking the door exactly, but positioned between him and it in a way that was probably unconscious and completely understandable. I should go in first, just to check, and then, however you want to do this," he said. "I'm not going to push." She looked at him for a moment, then she put her hand on the door handle. "Wait here," she said, "just for a minute." She went in. The door swung shut behind her with the soft, specific click of a hospital door, engineered to close fully without slamming, because someone had once thought about all the sleeping children on the other side of them. Ethan stood in the hallway and put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor. The linoleum had a pattern of small gray squares. Someone had scuffed a long black line across 3 of them with a gurney wheel or a cart. He pulled out his phone. 26 missed calls. He wasn't going to count the texts. He found Richard Holt's number and typed, "I know about the Singapore situation. I'll call you at 6 a.m. Do not go to the board tonight." Richard's response came in under 30 seconds. "Ethan, what the hell is going on? Where are you?" He put the phone away. He thought about the Singapore situation, because that's what it would be. Something Singapore adjacent. They'd been negotiating a critical infrastructure contract with a regional consortium for 11 months, and the timeline had been fraying for 6 weeks, and he'd known, in the way that you know things when you've built something and learned to feel its weight, that it was going to break at the worst possible moment. He'd known that, and he'd gone to dinner anyway, because he'd promised Claire, and because he'd been so bone-tired of being the person who never went to dinner. He thought about the 9 years of birthdays and the 9 years of first days of school and the 9 years of whatever a 9-year-old accumulated in the way of memories and experiences and things that make a person who they are, and he felt something in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't grief exactly. Or it was, but it was grief for something he hadn't known to grieve before tonight, which was a different and stranger thing. The door opened. Lena leaned out. Her expression was unreadable in a specific way. The unreadable expression of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it even though they're not entirely sure it's the right one. "She's awake," she said quietly. "She heard me come in." A pause. "I told her I brought someone she should meet." Ethan's heart did something he hadn't felt it do in a long time. It was not comfortable. "What did she say?" he asked. The corner of Lena's mouth moved. She said, "Is it the man from the photo?" He went still. "There's a photo?" "There's a photo," Lena confirmed. Her voice was very neutral. "On my bookshelf at home. From a long time ago. She found it when she was 5 and asked who you were, and I told her you were someone important from when I was younger, and she has never forgotten it and has asked approximately 400 follow-up questions since." She held his gaze. "She's 9. She notices everything." "She sounds like her mother," he said. Something shifted in Lena's face. She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in," she said. "But Ethan," slowly, "she doesn't... I haven't explained everything yet. Don't..." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to say anything that should come from you first." She looked at him for one more moment, measuring, then stepped aside. He walked through the door. The room was small, the way hospital rooms always are, organized around the bed with the efficient ruthlessness of a space designed for function above everything else. There was a monitor on the right side with green numbers, an IV line, a window on the far wall showing the black sky, and a single lit office building across the street. On the small table beside the bed, there was a paperback book with a bookmark in it, a cup with a straw, and a drawing, a pencil sketch of what appeared to be a building with a very elaborate roof structure. And in the bed, sitting up against 2 pillows with the blanket pulled up to her waist, was a girl. She was small for 9, or maybe she'd lost weight recently. The sickness, he understood, could do that. Her hair was dark like Lena's, but where Lena's was straight, this child's had a slight wave to it, the kind of wave he saw in old photos of himself at that age. Her eyes were large and very dark, and they were fixed on him with an expression that was not afraid and not shy, but was instead something he could only describe as evaluative. The expression of someone taking in data before drawing conclusions. He knew that expression. He saw it in the mirror. "Hi," he said, because there was no other place to start. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clear and a little rough from sleep, or maybe from the medications, or maybe just from being 9. "You're really tall." "I am," he said. "I always have been." She considered this. "My mom's not that tall." "No." "But I'm going to be," she said, with the particular confidence of a child who has been told this enough times to believe it. "My doctor said I have long bones." She frowned slightly. He made it sound like a good thing. "It is a good thing," Ethan said. He was standing just inside the doorway, and he was aware of every inch of distance between himself and that bed, and aware that closing it was not something he had any right to rush. "You knew my mom," the girl said. Not a question. "I did," he said. "A long time ago." "How long?" "About 10 years." She processed this with visible seriousness. "I'm 9, she said. "I know." "So you knew her before me?" "Yes." She looked at him, then at Lena, who had moved to stand beside the bed and put her hand very gently on Maya's shoulder. "Mom said you were someone I should meet," Maya said. "She doesn't usually bring people here." She looked back at Ethan. "She brought my neighbor Donna sometimes, and my mom's friend Patricia, who smells like lavender. That's basically it." "I know I'm not Donna or Patricia," he said. The corner of Maya's mouth moved. It was such a specific and particular motion, slightly asymmetrical, the left side leading, that he felt it somewhere deep and unguarded in him, because he had seen that expression his entire life in photographs of himself, in mirrors, in the faces his own daughter made when something struck her as mildly absurd. "No," Maya agreed. "You're not." She tilted her head. "What do you do?" "I build things," he said. "Technology. Systems that help businesses work better." She seemed to find this moderately interesting. "My mom builds things too," she said. "Real things. With walls." A pause. "She says walls are really just solutions to the problem of weather." He felt the breath go out of him, quietly, so she wouldn't see it. "Your mom's right about that," he said. Maya looked at him for a moment longer, and then she said very directly, "Are you my dad?" The room got very quiet. Lena's hand tightened on Maya's shoulder. Her eyes were on Ethan. He crossed the distance between the doorway and the chair beside the bed. He sat down in it so that he wasn't towering over her, so that they were, as much as possible given everything, at the same level. "That's something your mom and I need to talk about properly," he said carefully. "Before I give you an answer to that, because it's an important question and it deserves a real answer, not a fast one." Maya looked at him steadily. "That means yes," she said. He held her gaze. "You're pretty sharp," he said. "Everyone says that," she said. "It wasn't boastful, just factual." "Mom says it's because I read too much." She glanced at Lena. "But she also reads a lot, so I'm not sure that's a criticism." "It's not," Lena said softly, and something in her voice was very carefully controlled. Maya picked up the pencil sketch from the table beside her and turned it in her hands. "I'm designing a hospital," she said, apparently satisfied for the moment with the information she'd extracted. "A better one. This one has bad airflow. You can feel it, and the windows are too small. People get better faster when they can see the outside." She held up the sketch. "I'm giving mine bigger windows." Ethan looked at the drawing. It was rough in the way a 9-year-old's drawing is rough, but the proportions were thought about. She'd drawn elevation lines. She'd indicated scale with small figures at the base. It was not a child drawing a house for fun. It was a child working through a problem. "Can I see?" he asked. She handed it over without hesitation. He studied it for a moment. The logic was there. The windows she'd specified ran floor to ceiling on the south-facing elevation. The entryway had a canopy that would handle rain without creating a bottleneck. "The canopy," he said. "The angle. You've got it pitched so runoff goes to the sides." She looked at him with a new kind of attention. "You noticed that?" "I noticed that." "My mom's architecture friends never noticed that," she said. "They always look at the roof first." She seemed to be recalibrating something in her assessment of him. "The angle redirects foot traffic, too. If people have to step around puddles, they slow down and create congestion." "How old are you again?" he said. 9, she said. "But I've been thinking about this one for 3 months." She said it like 3 months was a significant investment of time, which at 9 years old it genuinely was. "It's a good design," he said, and he meant it without qualification. She took the drawing back from him and set it on the table. She looked at him again with those evaluative dark eyes, and he sat in the plastic hospital chair and looked back and felt, underneath everything else he was feeling, something very quiet and very large settle into place inside him. He had a daughter who designed hospitals from her hospital bed. He had missed 9 years of it. Both of those things were true at the same time, and he was going to have to live with both of them. Lena moved to the other side of the room, toward the window, and after a moment Ethan followed her while Maya returned to her drawing, her attention apparently satisfied for the moment, or at least redirected. "She knows more than she's letting on," Lena said under her breath. Not accusatory, just factual. "I know," he said at the same volume. "She's been asking about you, about the possibility of a father. Since she was 6, in earnest. She found the photo, and she doesn't drop things." Lena looked out the window at the office building across the street. "She came home from school one day and told me she'd looked up everything she could about inherited conditions that could affect bone marrow function, and then she asked me very politely if she could have her father's medical history. She looked it up herself." "She's 9, Lena said. "But yes." "When did she get sick?" he asked. He kept his voice low, even though Maya across the room was focused on her drawing and giving no indication she was listening, which almost certainly meant she was listening. "January," Lena said. "She was tired all the time, which I thought was a bug. Then she started bruising easily. Then her blood work." She stopped, breathed. "The doctors here are good. Dr. Okafor is... She's very good. The treatment plan is aggressive, but the prognosis is genuinely positive. She keeps telling me that." A pause. "I've been trying to believe her." "Believe her," he said. He didn't know where the certainty came from. It came anyway. Lena looked at him sideways. "You've been in this room for 6 minutes." "I know." "You don't get to be certain about things in this room." "I know that too." He looked at Maya, who was adding something to the roof of her hospital drawing with careful, deliberate strokes. But I'm going to act like her doctor is right, because the alternative doesn't work for me. Lena was quiet for a moment, then, very quietly, "It doesn't work for me either." They stood by the window for a moment, not touching, not talking. Maya scratched out something on the drawing, frowned at it, blew the eraser dust off the page. "Ethan," Lena said, "I know what you're going to say." "I don't think you do." He looked at her. "I'm going to say that tonight doesn't fix anything," she said, "and that tomorrow is going to be complicated, and that showing up at a hospital at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday it's not a gesture that covers 10 years. I need you to understand that." "I understand that," he said, "and I need you to understand that she is the thing I am not flexible about anything. I built everything around her, and I did it alone, and I don't need you to validate that or apologize for it. I just need you to know that before anything else, before whatever this," she made a small, undefined gesture between them, "before any of this gets worked out, she is the thing I don't compromise on." "She's the thing I don't compromise on either," he said, "starting now. I know that sounds like something someone says, but I mean it in the only way I know how to mean things, which is, I'm going to act on it." Lena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at her daughter. "She's going to have more questions," she said. "She always has more questions." "Good," he said. "So do I." Across the room, Maya looked up from her drawing. "I can hear you," she said mildly. "I know," Lena and Ethan said simultaneously in the same exact tone. Maya looked at them both with those enormous measuring eyes, and something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Okay," she said, and went back to the drawing. Ethan sat back down in the plastic chair and tried to remember when he'd last felt this frightened and this certain about the same thing at the same time. He couldn't. He didn't think he ever had. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He turned it off without looking at it. It was the first time in 6 years he'd turned his phone completely off without knowing what he was missing. It was also, somehow, the easiest decision he'd made all week. He stayed. They didn't talk much for a while after that. Maya asked him at one point what he thought about the load-bearing structure of her hospital design, and he told her honestly what he thought, that the central atrium she'd sketched would need more lateral support in the upper levels than she'd indicated. And she squinted at the drawing, chewed on the end of her pencil, and said, "You might be right," with the precise reluctance of someone who doesn't like being told they've missed something but respects the accuracy of it anyway. Lena, from her chair on the other side of the bed, glanced at him over the top of Maya's head with an expression that was complicated and very specific, and that he filed away to think about later. Around 11, Maya's eyes started to lose their precision. The questions got slower and the drawing set tipped slightly in her hands, and then she didn't correct it, just let it rest against the blanket. Lena reached over and took it from her gently and set it on the table, and Maya didn't protest, which meant she was further gone than she'd been letting on. "Mom," Maya said, not quite asleep. Her voice was different now, looser, stripped of the 9-year-old management she applied to her waking hours. "Right here," Lena said. A pause. "Is he staying?" Lena looked at Ethan across the bed. He looked back at her. "For a while," Lena said carefully. Maya's eyes were closed. "Okay," she said softly, and then, "He looks like me. The same. Around the eyes." "I know," Lena said. "I noticed it right away," Maya said, already half in sleep. "I didn't want to say it in front of him because I thought it might be awkward." "That was very considerate," Lena said, and her voice was doing something that was almost humor and almost something else entirely. "I know," Maya said, and was asleep. The monitor kept its green rhythm. The IV dripped its slow, measured drip. Outside, the city was the city. It didn't know and didn't care and went right on being itself, which was in its way the most comforting thing about it. Lena set Maya's drawing carefully on the table and then sat back in her chair and pressed both hands over her face for a moment. Not crying, or maybe at the very edge of it, where it becomes indistinguishable from just being exhausted. When she took her hands away, her eyes were dry, but her face looked like someone who had been carrying something for so long that the act of setting it down even partially had made her feel the weight of it for the first time. "She's going to ask me everything tomorrow," she said quietly. Not a complaint, just a fact she was already organizing herself around. "I'll be here tomorrow," Ethan said. Lena looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "I'll call my assistant at 6, get Sophie sorted for school, deal with whatever's burning at the company by 8, and I'll be back here by 9. He said it the way he scheduled things, precisely, without performance. "Ethan, you asked me to act instead of talk," he said. "This is me acting." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't say that tonight." "No," he said. "But it's what you meant every time you looked at me across that table and waited to see what I'd actually do." He kept his voice low, even. "I know the difference between a man saying the right things and a man doing them. I've been one, and I've been trying to become the other. I'm not asking you to trust me on that. I'm just telling you I'm going to show up tomorrow, and you can decide then what it means." Lena looked at him for a long time. The green light from the monitor caught the side of her face and made her look younger and older at the same time. "She really does have your eyes," she said finally. "Not as a weapon, just as a fact she'd been carrying for 9 years. I noticed it when she was a few months old, and I spent about 2 weeks furious at you about it." "Just 2 weeks?" "I cycled back to it periodically," she said, and there was a dryness in her tone that was the closest they'd come to something like normalcy in the last 4 hours. He almost smiled. It was the second time that night she'd surprised that out of him. "There's a lot I want to ask you," he said, "about the last 9 years. About her. About all of it. But I don't think tonight is not the night," she agreed. "Tonight I just need to get—" She exhaled. "I need to sit here for a while and know she's sleeping and know that the morning is coming." "Okay," he said. "I'll sit here with you." She looked like she was going to argue, and then looked like she'd decided not to, and then looked back at Maya. "You can stay for an hour," she said. "Then you should go home to your daughter. Sophie needs her father to come home." The way she said Sophie's name, carefully, with full attention, the way you say the name of someone you've been briefed on but haven't met, landed somewhere specific in him. "She does," he said, "and I'll tell her. Not tonight, but soon. I'll figure out how to tell her." "Tell her what?" "That she has a sister," he said. The word landed in the room the way certain words do, quietly, with more weight than its size would suggest. Lena looked at him, and her mouth opened slightly and then closed. "We don't know," she started. "We know enough," he said, "and Sophie she's going to need time with it, but she's not a kid who fears things she doesn't understand. She's a kid who needs to understand them." He paused. "She's going to want to meet Maya." Lena looked at Maya sleeping. "Let's get through the medical stuff first," she said. "Of course." A long pause. The monitor. The IV. The distant sound of a cart somewhere in the hall. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "Why did you really come here tonight?" she asked. Not the cab answer. Not the immediate response. Why really? He thought about it honestly. The way she'd always been able to make him think about things honestly. It was the same as it had ever been, apparently, underneath everything else. "Because everything I've built," he said slowly, "I built believing that if I got it big enough, and good enough, and real enough, it would justify everything it cost. All the things I walked away from." He looked at his hands. "And I was sitting at that table tonight realizing that the math doesn't work that way. That there isn't a number on the other side of the equation that makes the left side balance out. And then you told me about Maya, and—" He stopped. "And I realized that all the justifications I'd built were structures. And structures can look sound until something shows you where the load-bearing walls actually are." Lena was watching him. "She's a load-bearing wall," he said. "You both are. You always were." She didn't say anything for a long time. Outside, a siren moved through the streets below and faded. "Go home to Sophie," she said finally, "and come back tomorrow." He stood up. He looked at Maya one more time, at the small dark-haired girl with his eyes and her mother's mind sleeping in a hospital bed with a hand-drawn hospital design on the table beside her. "I'll be here," he said. Lena didn't respond. She was looking at her daughter, and there was something in her face that was private and enormous. And not for him. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. And he understood that and didn't push at it. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. "Lena," he said, without turning around. "What?" "Thank you," he said, "for raising her, for all of it, for doing it the way you did." He paused. "I know that doesn't cover it. I know it doesn't come close, but I needed to say it." She didn't answer. He waited a moment, then opened the door. "Ethan." He stopped. "She likes blueberries," Lena said very quietly. "If you come tomorrow, she won't ask for them, but she likes them." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Blueberries," he said. "Fresh, not frozen," she said. "She has opinions." "She sounds like she has opinions about everything." "She has opinions about everything," Lena confirmed. He nodded. He walked out into the hallway and let the door swing shut behind him. He stood in the corridor with its old paper light and its distant machinery and its particular silence, and he reached into his pocket and turned his phone back on. 31 new notifications loaded themselves. He looked at them without seeing them. His head of legal, his board chair. Richard Holt. So many times the preview had collapsed into a number. 3 major institutional investors. A wire service journalist whose number he didn't recognize, but whose persistence suggested someone had tipped them off. The Singapore Consortium's lead negotiator. Callaway Systems was apparently in the middle of a genuine crisis. An $11 billion company's future was being actively negotiated in rooms he wasn't in, by people who needed him to be there. He found Richard's number and typed, "Tomorrow at 6. I'll fix it. Don't do anything until then." He pressed the elevator button. He stood in the hallway and looked at the door to room 714 and thought about a 9-year-old girl's drawing of a better hospital and the sound of her voice saying, "I noticed it right away. I didn't want to say it in front of him because I thought it might be awkward." The elevator arrived. He stepped in. He rode down to the lobby, walked out through the automatic doors onto East 33rd Street, flagged a cab heading uptown, and gave the driver his home address. The city moved around him the way it always did. Enormous, purposeful, indifferent. He watched it through the window as the cab headed north and felt the shape of the next day beginning to arrange itself in his mind. 6 a.m. call with Richard. Sort through the legal exposure. Board call at 7:30. Singapore at 8. And then back to a 7th-floor hospital room with a pint of fresh blueberries because a 9-year-old girl had opinions, and he was, apparently, just starting to learn what they were. He pulled out his phone one more time. Not to check the notifications, he'd deal with those at 6. He opened his photos instead. He scrolled to a folder he hadn't opened in a while, found a photo of himself at roughly 22 on a roof in Harlem, looking at a city he was absolutely certain he was about to conquer. He looked at it for a long moment, then he closed it and watched Manhattan go past the window in the dark, and thought about all the things a person could build that had nothing to do with money and how he'd managed to spend the better part of a decade confusing the two. The cab turned onto Central Park West. The park was a strip of darkness alongside the illuminated avenue, trees invisible against the sky, just the suggestion of something large and living and in the middle of everything. His apartment building came up on the right. He paid the driver and got out and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up. Sophie's window was dark. She'd been asleep for hours. He went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment without turning on the light. He could see her shape in the bed, the slope of her shoulder, the way one arm was always outside the blanket no matter what. He could hear her breathing. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to his own room, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at the floor and thought about a girl who designed hospitals from her hospital bed, and a woman who had built a life from nothing twice over, and the 10 years he'd spent believing that the right kind of success could make a man whole. He had been wrong about a lot of things. He was going to spend whatever time was left being less wrong about them. At 5:45, his alarm went off. He was already awake. He was on his third cup of coffee when Richard Holt finally stopped talking. The call had started at 6:02, and it was now 6:47, and in that 45 minutes, Richard had covered the Singapore situation in its entirety. The consortium's walkout at 9:30 the previous evening, the leaked internal memo that had apparently accelerated the walkout, the legal team's assessment of their exposure, the board's overnight communications, and the journalist from the wire service who'd published a partial story at midnight under the headline, "Callaway Systems Faces Critical Partnership Collapse," that had, by 6 a.m., been picked up by 4 financial news outlets and was currently sitting in the inboxes of a significant percentage of their institutional investor base. Ethan had listened to all of it standing at his kitchen counter in the same clothes he'd come home in, minus the jacket, with the phone on speaker and his hands wrapped around the mug, and Sophie's drawings covering the end of the counter where she'd left them the night before, a sketch of a robot with very expressive eyebrows, and underneath it a note that said, "Dad, I need colored pencils, the good ones, not the kind from the drugstore." When Richard finished, there was a silence. "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay," Richard repeated, with the tone of a man who has been awake since 3 a.m. and finds the word inadequate. "That's your response." "It's my opening response," Ethan said. "Here's the rest. Call Park at Singapore and tell him I'll be on a call at 8. Not 8:30, 8. Tell him I'm aware of the memo and that I have context for it that changes the calculus. Tell him I'd like 90 minutes of his time and our lead negotiator's time before anyone makes any final decisions." He set down the mug. "The memo, Sue. Who leaked it?" A pause. "Legal thinks it was Darren Walsh." Darren Walsh was their deputy head of partnerships, a man Ethan had hired 3 years ago on the strength of a recommendation from someone whose judgment he now retroactively questioned. "Is he in the building?" "He's been in the building since 5:30, Richard said. "I think he anticipated this conversation." "Good. Tell HR I want him in a room by 7, and tell legal I want someone with him before he says anything to anyone outside the company." He moved to the window. The park was coming visible through early morning light, the trees going from black shapes to green ones. "The board call is at 7:30? Patricia's been pushing for 6:30. Tell Patricia 7:30. I need 30 minutes before I talk to the board, and I need them from you, not from her." Richard exhaled. "Ethan, where were you last night?" The question was professional. Richard had every right to ask it, but it landed in a way that the professional framing didn't fully contain. "Where were you last night?" "Sitting in a hospital room with a daughter I didn't know I had, and a woman I walked away from 10 years ago, and a pint of blueberries I'd been too stunned to actually remember to bring." "I was dealing with something personal," he said. "It won't affect the company's position on Singapore. I'll explain when the situation is stable." "You've never once in 6 years used the word personal," Richard said. "I know. That's..." A pause. "Okay. 7:30 board call. 8 a.m. Singapore. I'll have the legal summary on your desk by 7. "Thank you, Richard." "Ethan." A beat. "Whatever it is. The personal thing. I hope it works out." Richard Holt was not a man given to that kind of statement. Ethan registered it. "Me too," he said. He ended the call and went to wake Sophie. She was already half awake, which was her usual state in the mornings. Not a hard sleeper, just a slow one. Someone who came back to consciousness gradually and required approximately 12 minutes and a glass of orange juice before she was fully inhabiting her own personality. He sat on the edge of her bed and she crawled up from the blankets like something surfacing from deep water and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, which was her version of a good morning. "You smell like last night," she said, muffled against his shirt. "I came home late and went straight to sleep," he said, which was almost true. "Did your date go bad?" He'd forgotten he'd mentioned the dinner to her, just that he had plans, that he'd be home by midnight. He hadn't said date. She'd inferred it. She always did. "It was complicated," he said. Sophie pulled back and looked at him. She had his mother's eyes, pale gray, with an assessment in them that her teachers consistently described as unusual for her age. "Complicated bad or complicated interesting?" "Complicated interesting," he said. "I'll tell you more soon. I promise." She studied him for a moment with that gray gaze. Sophie had a finely calibrated sense for when he was telling her the complete truth versus the true but incomplete version, and he was aware she was running that calibration now. "Okay," she said finally, which meant she'd accepted the partial answer for now and reserved the right to return to it. "I need you to have breakfast and get to school," he said. "Mrs. Okafor is going to pick you up today. I have back-to-back calls until at least noon. Is the company thing bad?" "It's manageable," he said. "I've got it." She nodded. Then, "Can I have colored pencils? The good ones?" I saw the note. "I wrote it last night in case you missed me in the morning." "I didn't miss you," he said. "I'm here." She leaned against him again briefly, then swung her legs out of bed and padded toward the bathroom, and he watched her go with the particular feeling he always got watching Sophie move through the apartment. This person he'd made, this specific and remarkable person who had somehow ended up in the world, and in his custody, and in the middle of his life, and who drew robots with expressive eyebrows, and corrected his board presentations and asked him every Sunday whether he'd been on any dates lately, with the earnest hopefulness of a child who wanted her father to be happy. He was going to have to tell her about Maya, not today, but soon. He went to the kitchen and started making her eggs. By 7, he was in his home office, jacket back on, the legal summary open on his screen. By 7:20, he'd read it twice and flagged 4 points he wanted to address with Patricia before the full board call. At 7:28, Sophie knocked on the office door to say she was leaving with Mrs. Okafor, and he came out and kissed her head and told her to have a good day. And she told him not to forget the colored pencils, and he said he wouldn't, and she left. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it went quiet after Sophie left, a quality of quiet that was entirely different from the quiet of 3 a.m. This one had her absence in it. He thought about Maya's room at NYU Langone, the green monitor numbers, the drawing on the table. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Lena. "How is she this morning?" He stared at it for a moment, then sent it. The board call started at 7:30 on the dot, because Patricia Wynne was constitutionally incapable of starting late and had arranged calls for 30 years that reflected that. There were 11 people on the line, 6 independent directors, 3 investor representatives, Richard, and Ethan's general counsel, Simone Park, who had the particular calm of someone who had prepared for every version of this conversation simultaneously. "Before we begin," Ethan said, "I want to address the memo." "I think that's wise," Patricia said. In 17 years of board membership and 4 years as chair, she had never once changed the temperature of her voice based on circumstances. It was always this same measured, slightly formal register, the voice of someone who had decided long ago that equanimity was the most useful thing she could bring to any room. The memo was an internal document from our partnership team outlining 2 scenarios for the Singapore deal, the preferred scenario and a contingency, Ethan said. What was leaked was the contingency, which outlined potential restructuring of the timeline. That's a normal document for us to have internally. What it doesn't reflect is our current position, which is that the preferred scenario remains viable. I've spoken with Park at Singapore this morning. We have a call at 8. The headline, one of the investor representatives started. The headline is based on incomplete information, Ethan said. I understand why it created concern. I'm asking for 2 hours to get on the phone with the Singapore team before we treat this as a crisis, because I don't believe it is one yet. Yet, said one of the independent directors. Harrison Delgado, a venture investor who'd been on the board since Series B. He had the unfortunate habit of pulling the single most uncomfortable word out of any sentence. Yet, Ethan confirmed, which is why I'm on the phone with Singapore at 8. Patricia moved the conversation efficiently through the necessary points: legal exposure, investor communication strategy, a proposed statement for the press, the Walsh situation. Ethan answered everything directly and without defensiveness. He knew the company better than anyone on that call, had known it longer, had built the architecture of it from the ground up. And that knowledge was still there, still intact, still functional, even with everything else that was sitting in his chest this morning. What was different was the proportion of things. 6 months ago, 3 months ago, a situation this size would have been the only thing in his head. Every thought routed back to it. Every peripheral thing filtered out. That was what made him good at the work. That total, sometimes savage prioritization. This morning, the Singapore deal was important and he was handling it, but it was not the only thing in his head. There was a room on the 7th floor of a hospital on East 33rd Street, and a 9-year-old girl with a pencil sketch on her bedside table, and a woman who had looked at him across a decade of distance and said, "She's extraordinary, Ethan. You have no idea." He thought that might matter, that the proportion had shifted. He wasn't sure yet whether it made him better or worse at the work, and he suspected the answer was some of both, and he suspected further that he was going to have to find a way to live with that. The board call ended at 8:14. The Singapore call started at 8:17. Park Jae-won was 51 years old and had been in infrastructure investment for 25 years and was one of the sharpest people Ethan had ever negotiated with, which was a population that skewed sharp. He had a way of listening that was entirely active, no gap between what you said and his processing of it, no pretense of considering things he'd already concluded. "I appreciate you making time this morning," Ethan said. "I appreciated your message at 6:15, Park said. There was the very edge of something dry in his voice. "I don't receive many messages at 6:15. "I understand we have a situation. We have a memo," Park said. "The memo describes a contingency in which you restructure the partnership timeline. I would like to understand how seriously that contingency is being considered." "It's a planning document," Ethan said. "The contingency was drafted because our legal team requires us to document our options. The preferred scenario hasn't changed." A pause. "The preferred scenario requires delivery milestones in March and June. Your last update moved the March milestone." "By 3 weeks," Ethan said, "due to supply chain delays that have since resolved. Your partnership team's document suggests they may not have resolved." "I'm overriding my partnership team's assessment," Ethan said, "with data. I'll send you a revised engineering summary by noon today that addresses each milestone, directly, with current numbers." He paused. "Mr. Park, we've been negotiating this deal for 11 months. You know my company, and you know my track record. I'm asking you to give me until noon before drawing conclusions from a document that was never intended to reach you." Another pause. Longer this time. "I will look at your engineering summary," Park said. "I will make no decisions before then." "Thank you." "Mr. Calloway," Park said, as Ethan was about to close out, "you were not reachable last night for approximately 4 hours. I was aware of the calls, and you chose not to take them." It was not quite an accusation. It was an observation with an implied question at the end of it, from a man who was considering whether to trust his company with an infrastructure deal worth several $100 million. "I was attending to something that required my physical presence," Ethan said. "I was confident my team was capable of managing initial communications, and I made the judgment that returning the calls could wait until morning without material impact on our position." He paused. "I was correct about the last part. I acknowledge that the first part was a judgment call, and that reasonable people might have made it differently." Park was quiet for a moment. "My wife tells me I make poor judgment calls about similar things," he said. It was the most personal thing he'd said in 11 months of negotiations. "I look forward to your engineering summary." The call ended. Ethan sat in his office chair and exhaled fully for what felt like the first time since 6 a.m. His phone showed a message from Lena, delivered 8 minutes ago. "She's awake, ate breakfast, asking when you're coming." A pause, and then a second message beneath it. She asked, "Not me. I want to be clear about that." He typed back, "By 9, traffic depending." Then, "Tell her I have blueberries." He hit send. He looked at what he'd written. He sent a third message. Fresh, not frozen. He could picture, very specifically, the expression on Lena's face when she read that. He couldn't quite name the expression, but he could picture it. He was out of the apartment by 8:20, blueberries in a paper bag from the market 2 blocks down, his laptop in his bag because he was going to need to finalize the engineering summary from somewhere, and his coffee in a travel cup because it was that kind of morning and probably that kind of week. He got to NYU Langone at 8:56. Lena was in the hallway when the elevator opened. She was wearing different clothes from last night. She'd clearly gone home at some point, or had a bag here. And she was holding a coffee cup and looking at her phone. And she glanced up when she heard the elevator, and her expression did its complicated thing again, the one he was starting to learn the components of. 4 minutes early, she said. Traffic was lighter than I thought. She looked at the paper bag. You actually got them. I said I would. People say things, she said. I know. He held her gaze for a moment. I'm trying to be a different data point. She looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the door to 7:14. She's been drawing since 6 this morning, she said. The nurses think she's charming. She's been asking them structural questions about the building and taking notes. A pause. I should warn you that she now has approximately 15 follow-up questions from last night that she has organized into what she described to me as logical groupings. Of course she has, he said. She also looked you up. He stopped. She has a phone in there? She has my old tablet. She found it in my bag at about 7:30, and I turned around and she was reading your Wikipedia page. Lena kept her expression carefully even. She told me the Forbes profile was mostly surface level, but that she found the patent filings more informative. He stared at her. She's 9, Lena said. I know. She read the patent filings. She said, and I'm quoting directly, his early architecture decisions show he was thinking about network resilience before anyone was talking about it publicly, which is interesting, but the 2019 pivot seems like it was reactive rather than strategic. Then she asked me if I thought she was right. A pause. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She seemed disappointed. He stood in the hallway outside his daughter's hospital room and felt something he did not have a clean word for. It was somewhere between astonishment and grief, and something that might eventually become pride if he survived long enough for it to develop. Was she right? Lena asked. About the 2019 pivot? Partially, he said. The pivot was reactive, but strategically reactive. There's a difference. He stopped. I can't believe I'm defending my business decisions to a 9-year-old who hasn't met me yet. You met her last night, Lena said. She didn't know who I was last night. She knew exactly who you were last night, Lena said. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. She looked at the door. That's the thing about Maya. She processes first. She never says anything before she's ready. He thought about last night, the calculating eyes, the careful questions, the way she'd handed him the drawing without hesitation because she'd already decided she trusted his assessment of it. She decided quickly, though, he said. She did, Lena said. Something moved across her face. She's been deciding since she was 5 years old, looking at that photo and making up her mind about a man she'd never met. I think by the time you walked into that room last night, she stopped. She'd already given you a chance. She was just waiting to see if you'd take it. He didn't know what to do with that. He filed it away in the place where he was putting all the things he didn't know how to process yet. Can I go in? He said. Yeah, Lena said. Go in. Maya was sitting up in bed with the tablet propped against her knees and a notebook open beside her. She'd organized her pillows differently from last night, stacked higher on one side so she had something to lean against while she worked. The pencil sketch hospital was still on the side table, but she'd added to it. He could see from the doorway that the south elevation now had the additional lateral support he'd mentioned. You fixed the upper level support, he said, from the doorway. She looked up. You were right about it, she said, as if this was a minor administrative matter. I ran the load calculations this morning. On paper, not a program. I wanted to see if I got the same answer. She set the tablet aside. I did. He came in. He set the paper bag on the table beside her drawing. She looked at it with an expression of careful neutrality that didn't quite conceal her interest. Blueberries, he said. Fresh. She reached into the bag without ceremony and ate one. Then she looked at him. Mom told you I liked them. She did. That was her being nice to you, Maya said. In case you're wondering, she doesn't do that for everyone. She ate another blueberry with the serenity of someone who has accepted that adults operate on a different schedule than they should. Sit down. I have questions. He sat in the same plastic chair from the night before. Your mother mentioned. She told you about the logical groupings? She did. Maya seemed to consider whether this was a violation of something, then decided it wasn't. The first grouping is factual, she said, in the tone of a person who has prepared an agenda. The second grouping is more, she searched for the word, more personal. You can skip the personal ones if you want, but I'd prefer if you didn't. I won't skip them, he said. Okay. She looked at him with those dark eyes, direct and serious. First question. Are you my father? Yes, he said. I am. She held his gaze. You're sure? I'm sure. She nodded, once, precisely. Okay, she said, in exactly the same tone she'd used last night. Not triumphant, not emotional, just accepting a data point. Then she picked up her notebook. Do you have any heart conditions in your family? He blinked. That's your second question? It's my first factual question, she said. The biological father question was the preliminary. She looked at her notebook. Heart conditions, autoimmune disorders, bone marrow conditions specifically, any cancers before the age of 50. I have a list. She turned the notebook to show him. She had a list, a numbered list in neat handwriting, organized by category. He looked at the list for a moment. He looked at his 9-year-old daughter's medical questionnaire, which she had prepared herself in a hospital room at some point before 8 a.m. No heart conditions, he said. My grandfather had a mild arrhythmia in his 70s, but nothing significant. No autoimmune disorders that we know of. My paternal grandmother had breast cancer at 63. She survived it. No bone marrow conditions on either side that I'm aware of. He paused. I'll get you my full medical records. Today if I can manage it. Maya was writing. Thank you, she said, without looking up. My doctor says it's likely the condition is spontaneous, not inherited, but she wants to be thorough. She finished writing and looked at the list. Okay, next factual group. Why did you and my mom stop being together? The directness of it, not hostile, just exact, landed like something he should have anticipated and hadn't. That's a long answer, he said carefully, and I want to give you the honest version of it, which means I need to think about how to explain it in a way that's fair to both of us. Maya looked at him. The short version is fine, she said. I can handle the longer one later. The short version, he said, is that I made a choice about my work and my future that I thought was the right one, and it turned out to be the wrong one, and your mother and I lost each other because of it. Maya absorbed this. You left, she said. Yes. Did she ask you to stay? He felt the question in his chest like something pressing. She didn't have to, he said. I should have known to. Maya looked at her notebook. She wrote something, though he couldn't see what. Then she said, My mom never said bad things about you. I want you to know that. I asked once, I was 7, and she said he was someone who cared very much about certain things, and sometimes when people care very much about certain things, they make choices that hurt the people around them without meaning to. That's a quote. I memorized it. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about Lena, 23 years old, alone, figuring out how to explain a missing person to a child who was too smart to accept incomplete answers. She was generous, he said. That was more generous than I deserved. Maya considered this. Probably, she agreed. But she's usually right about people. She's a good judge. She looked at him. She was right that you'd come, by the way. When I was sick and she said she was going to find my father, I asked her if she was sure you'd want to know. She said yes. A pause. I wasn't sure she was right, but I wanted her to be. I'm glad she was, he said. Me too, Maya said, very simply, the simplest thing either of them had said. Lena came in from the hallway. She'd been getting a fresh coffee, or giving them space, or both, and stopped just inside the door when she saw the notebook and the blueberries and whatever was on their faces. Is everything... she started. We're fine, Maya said. We were getting through the factual questions. She looked at Ethan. We're on the personal ones now, if that's okay. Maya, Lena said with the tone of a mother who loves her child completely and is also occasionally exhausted by her. It's okay, Ethan said. He looked at Maya. Go ahead. Maya set down her notebook. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the assessing look, something different, something that was younger and more exposed. "Are you going to leave again?" she asked. The room went very quiet. "No," he said. "People say things," she said. It was Lena's phrase, and she'd heard it enough times to have absorbed it into herself, and it landed with a weight that was partly the child's and partly the mother's. "I know they do," he said. "So I'm going to tell you what I told your mother last night. I don't want you to trust me based on what I say. I want you to trust me based on what I do, which means you'll have to watch and wait and decide for yourself." He held her gaze. "I know that's harder than a promise." Maya looked at him steadily. "It's more useful than a promise," she said. "Promises are just predictions. Behavior is data." He heard Lena, very quietly, from the doorway, exhale. "You're right about that," he said. "I know," she said. Then, carefully, "Can I call you something? Or should I just—" She stopped. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not the calibrated uncertainty of someone buying time to think, but the real thing. A 9-year-old asking a question she didn't know the answer to. "Whatever feels right," he said. "There's no wrong answer to that." She thought about it for a moment with visible seriousness. "I'll figure it out," she said finally. "I'll let you know when I do." "Fair enough," he said. She picked up a blueberry, ate it, looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone checking an internal list. "Okay," she said. "I think that covers the main groupings." She glanced at her notebook. "I have some secondary questions, but they can wait." "Secondary questions," Ethan said, "about the company, and the technology, and the design philosophy behind the original architecture." She picked up the tablet. "I have some thoughts about the 2019 pivot." "I heard," he said. "You want to know what I think?" "I genuinely do," he said. "But first I have to send an engineering summary to Singapore by noon. So if you can give me about 40 minutes. Maya looked at him, then at the laptop bag he'd set by the chair. "You brought work," she said. "I brought work," he confirmed, "because your mother told me you had opinions, and I figured a 40-minute work session was probably the fastest way to demonstrate that I'm a person and not a guest appearance." Maya looked at him for a moment, then at Lena, then back at Ethan. "You can work at the table," she said, with the air of someone granting a concession. "The Wi-Fi in here is actually decent. The hospital upgraded it last year, probably because patients complained." "Probably," he said. He set up his laptop at the small table under the window and started working, and the room settled into a particular kind of quiet. The sounds of the hospital outside the door, the scratch of Maya's pencil on her drawing, the soft tap of Ethan's keyboard, Lena in the chair by the bed reading something on her phone with her feet tucked under her. It was not a comfortable quiet. It was too new for that. Too strange and too loaded and too aware of itself. But it was a real quiet. Not performed, not maintained artificially. Just 3 people in a room that was becoming, very slowly and very imperfectly, something it hadn't been 8 hours ago. He finished the engineering summary at 11:40. He read it twice, sent it to Richard for review, and then forwarded it directly to Park Jae-won's office with a brief note. He closed the laptop and stretched his shoulders, which had developed the specific ache of someone who'd been hunched over a screen, and Maya looked up from her drawing. "Done?" she said. "Done for now," he said. "What are your thoughts on the 2019 pivot?" She straightened against her pillows and picked up her notebook. "Okay," she said, with the particular energy of someone who has been waiting for this. "So your core architecture up to 2018 was built around anticipating failure points. You were essentially designing for resilience, but the 2019 pivot moved toward optimization. Those are opposite design philosophies. Resilient systems tolerate redundancy. Optimized systems eliminate it." She looked at him. "So my question is, did you know at the time that you were making a trade-off, or did you think you could have both?" He looked at his daughter, his 9-year-old daughter who had read his patent filings. "We thought we could have both," he said. "Were you right?" "Partially," he said. "We got the optimization gains we targeted. We lost some resilience capacity. It created exposure in 2021 when the supply chain disruptions hit, which cost us about 6 weeks of revenue." He paused. "In retrospect, we traded short-term efficiency for long-term vulnerability. Your analysis is correct." Maya wrote something in her notebook. That happens a lot, she said, almost to herself. People optimize for what they can see and underweight what they can't. He thought about a 22-year-old man who had optimized his life for a specific future and eliminated everything that didn't serve it. He thought about what that optimization had cost. He thought about 9 years. It does, he said. Lena, from her chair, said nothing. But she was watching him, and he was aware of her watching, and he was aware that she had understood the double meaning of what just passed between him and their daughter, and was deciding how to hold it. Maya put her notebook down and looked at her drawing. She'd been adding to it all morning, and it had grown considerably. A full building now, floor plans implied by dotted lines. The south elevation detailed what appeared to be a green roof on the structure. "Do you like buildings?" she asked. "I know you work with systems, but buildings are systems too." "I know they are," he said. "Your mother taught me that." Maya glanced at Lena with a look that was not surprised exactly, but noting something, filing it. "She's very good," Maya said, with the gravity of someone reporting a fact about a third party who happens to be sitting 6 feet away. At seeing how things fit together. She once redesigned a load-bearing wall in an apartment renovation, and the engineer said it was wrong, and she proved the engineer was wrong with calculations on a napkin, and the engineer was annoyed about it for months. She paused. "I was there. I was 6. I remember." Lena made a noise from her chair that was somewhere between amusement and protest. "I wasn't trying to embarrass him," she said. "You were a little bit," Maya said. "He was wrong about the wall." "You were a little bit trying to embarrass him," Maya confirmed cheerfully, and looked back at Ethan as if this settled the matter. He looked at Lena. Lena looked at him. The expression on her face was the complicated one again, but it had something new in it now. Something that was lighter, something that existed in the space that only opens up when the heaviest part of a thing has been said. His phone buzzed. "Richard. Singapore confirmed. They're back in. Call at 3 p.m. to resume. You're a miracle worker." And then, almost immediately after, "Also Walsh is out, done by noon." He typed back, "Good. I'll be on the 3 o'clock. He thought for a moment, then added, "Richard, I want to talk next week about restructuring my schedule. Long term. I'll explain then." He put the phone away. He looked at Maya, who had gone back to her drawing with the complete focus of someone who had finished one task and moved cleanly to the next. The morning light had shifted. It was coming in differently now, at a lower angle through the window, and it caught the top of Maya's head and made her hair look almost warm. She was chewing the inside of her cheek while she drew, which was a habit he had, and which he recognized now as something he'd passed along without knowing, the way you pass things along when you don't know you're doing it. Lena caught him looking. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a moment with those careful, complicated eyes, and then she looked back down at her phone. He was still there at 2 in the afternoon when Dr. Okafor came in for rounds. She was a tall woman in her mid-40s, with the kind of focused, economical manner of someone who had been giving difficult information to frighten people for a long time and had learned to be direct without being cold. She reviewed Maya's charts, checked her IV line, asked Maya a series of questions that Maya answered with her characteristic precision, and then looked at Ethan with the frank appraisal of someone deciding how much information was appropriate for a person she'd never seen in this room before. Lena said, "This is Maya's father," and Dr. Okafor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not surprised, more like updating a file. "I'm glad you're here," she said to Ethan, simply, without subtext. "We've requested your medical history through the intake form. If you can supplement that with anything from your own physician, I'll have my doctor send records by end of day," he said. "Good." She looked at Maya. "How's the pain today?" 3 out of 10, Maya said. "It was 5 when I woke up. It's better." "The new dosage is working," Dr. Okafor said. "We're going to run another panel this afternoon, and I want to review the results before we finalize the treatment trajectory for next week. But I want you to know..." She looked at Maya with the directness of someone who has learned that children, especially these children, deserve to be addressed and not talked around. "The numbers from yesterday are encouraging, not fixed, not finished, but encouraging." "I know the difference between encouraging and fixed," Maya said. "I've looked it up." I know you have, Dr. Okafor said, and there was something like warmth in it. She looked at Lena. I'll be back at 5 with the panel results. She looked at Ethan once more, brief and assessing. It's good for her to have family here, she said, and left. The room settled again. Maya ate the last of the blueberries. Lena went to refill her coffee. The monitor kept its green rhythm. Ethan sat in his plastic chair by his daughter's bed and listened to the sounds of the hospital doing what hospitals do, and thought about what Dr. Okafor had said. It's good for her to have family here. The word had landed differently this time than it did in ordinary sentences. Not as a category, father, daughter, family, but as a thing with weight and texture, as a thing he was now part of. He had arrived at that restaurant the night before believing he was going to endure a dinner and confirm what he already knew, that love was a complication he'd given up the capacity for, that Sophie was enough, that the company was enough, that the careful, controlled life he'd built was holding. He had been wrong about all of it. Not catastrophically wrong. The company was real. Sophie was real. The work was real. But wrong in the way you're wrong when you've been reading a map that's accurate as far as it goes and haven't noticed that it stops at the edge of the territory you're actually standing in. The territory was larger than the map. It always had been. He was only now beginning to see how much. Maya looked up from her drawing. You're still here, she said. Not surprised, just noting it. I'm still here, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said, and went back to the drawing. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement. It was also, he understood, exactly what she'd meant it to be. A door held open slightly, a provisional grant, the beginning of something that would take a long time and a lot of showing up before it became what it had the potential to become. He opened his laptop again to prep for the 3 o'clock Singapore call. Maya drew her hospital with its better windows and its load-bearing walls in the right places. The monitor kept counting. Outside, New York City went on being itself. Enormous, indifferent, full of 10 million lives that had nothing to do with this room, full of people who had no idea that in a small hospital room on the 7th floor of a building on East 33rd Street, a man who had spent 10 years optimizing for the wrong things was sitting next to a 9-year-old girl who had already identified the flaw in his logic and was beginning, very slowly, to understand what it would take to correct it. He had the Singapore call at 3. He had a company to save by increments. He had a daughter at home who needed colored pencils, and a father who came home. He had a daughter in a hospital bed who had questions organized into logical groupings, and a design philosophy he was only starting to comprehend. And across the room, Lena Brooks came back through the door with a fresh coffee, and she looked at the two of them, at the man in the plastic chair and the girl in the hospital bed, both of them bent over their respective work. And she stood in the doorway for a moment without coming in, just looking at something she had never quite let herself picture, and her expression did something complicated and private that she didn't let anyone see. Then she came in and closed the door and sat down in her chair. The 3 o'clock Singapore call ran long. Ethan took it in the hallway outside room 714, standing by the window at the end of the corridor that looked out over a parking structure, and beyond it, a thin strip of the East River catching the afternoon light. Park Jae-won had reviewed the engineering summary and come back with 7 specific questions, all of them sharp, all of them fair, and Ethan answered each one directly while watching a tugboat move slowly up the river below and thinking, in the background of his mind, about lateral load distribution and a 9-year-old's pencil sketch. The call ended at 4:17. The deal was not saved, not yet, not fully, but it was breathing again, which was more than it had been doing at midnight. Park had agreed to a follow-up session the next morning with the full technical teams present, which meant Ethan needed to have his engineering leads prepped and on the line by 8 a.m., which meant he needed to be on a call with them by 6. He texted Richard the summary of where things stood, told him to loop in the engineering leads before end of day, and then stood in the hospital corridor for a moment with the phone in his hand and the river visible through the glass and the sounds of the pediatric floor doing its afternoon work around him. He had been a person whose days had a particular structure for 6 years. The structure was wake early, work, manage Sophie's logistics, work, attend whatever the company required, work, come home late, check on Sophie, work a little more, sleep inadequately, repeat. It was not a structure that had room for hospitals. It was not a structure that had room for plastic chairs or fresh blueberries or 9-year-old girls with notebooks organized into logical groupings. He was going to have to rebuild the structure. He put the phone away and went back to room 714. Maya was asleep. The afternoon panel had happened while he was on the call. Dr. Okafor's team had come and gone, drawn blood, checked numbers, spoken briefly with Lena in voices pitched low. Ethan had watched through the narrow window in the door while he was on hold for a portion of the Singapore call, and he'd seen Lena's face during the exchange with the doctor and had read her expression the way he'd been learning to read it. The careful containment, the deliberate calm, the thing underneath the calm that was not calm at all. Now Lena was in her chair with her legs crossed and her sketchbook open on her knee. Actual architecture work, preliminary drawings for something, her pencil moving in the practiced economical way of someone who has drawn thousands of lines and knows without thinking which ones are useful. She looked up when he came in, assessed him briefly, looked back at her work. "How did it go?" she asked quietly, because Maya was sleeping. "Better than last night," he said. "Not fixed." "The company," she said. Not a question, just locating the subject. "The company," he confirmed. He sat in the plastic chair, which had become, in the course of a day, his chair in a way that it hadn't been the night before. "What did Dr. Okafor say?" Lena's pencil stopped. "The panel results are mixed. The new medication is doing what it's supposed to do, which is good. Her counts are moving in the right direction, which is also good, but—" She stopped, looked at her sketchbook without seeing it. "She wants to add a second drug to the protocol. There's a clinical trial. NYU is part of it. The drug has had good results in the early data. It adds 3 weeks to the treatment timeline." "Is Maya going to agree to it?" he asked. Lena looked up at him. "Why do you ask it that way?" "Because from everything I've seen in the last 20 hours, he said, she's the one running the risk-benefit analysis. Something crossed Lena's face, complicated, and then, briefly, not. "Yeah," she said. "She is. I told her about the trial when Dr. Okafor left. She asked for the published data. I'm getting it printed from the nurses' station." She paused. "She'll agree to it. She's not afraid of treatment. She's afraid of being kept in the dark about it." "That's different from most 9-year-olds, he said. "Most 9-year-olds didn't spend 2 years asking their pediatrician detailed follow-up questions at every checkup," Lena said. "Her first doctor told me it was unusual. Her second doctor told me it was a gift." She looked at Maya sleeping. "I think it's both." He looked at Maya, too. In sleep, the management she applied to her waking hours relaxed and she looked younger, closer to the 9 that she was, the age that mostly got swallowed by how she moved through the world. "She chews the inside of her cheek," he said, "when she's concentrating." Lena was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I do the same thing. My mother used to tell me to stop." "I know," Lena said again, softer this time. He looked at Lena. She was still looking at Maya, and her expression had that private quality again, the one she turned away from him when she remembered herself. He didn't push at it. He was learning which things to push and which to leave. "I need to tell Sophie," he said. "Soon. Not today. Today has been—" He stopped. "But soon." Lena's pencil moved again, just slightly, a single mark on the paper. "I know," she said. "How do you think she'll take it?" He thought about Sophie, about her gray eyes and her calibrating intelligence, and the way she'd said complicated bad, or complicated interesting this morning, already sorting the possibilities before she had the information. "She's going to want to meet Maya," he said. "That'll be her first instinct. She collects people she finds interesting." "Maya's going to find that overwhelming," Lena said. "She adjusts to new people slowly. It takes her a while to—" She stopped. "She trusted you fast by her standards. That's not normal for her." "Why do you think she did?" he asked. He meant it genuinely. He wanted the answer, and he knew Lena would have one. Lena looked at the sketchbook. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer, and then she said, "Because she'd already decided what she thought of you, before you walked in. She'd spent 9 years with a story and a photograph in her own imagination, and then you were there, and the real version matched the story closely enough. She paused. And because you looked at her drawing and said the right thing about the lateral support, she'd been waiting to tell someone about the lateral support for 3 months. He absorbed that. A 9-year-old who had spent 9 years building a picture of a father from a photograph and a story her mother told her with careful, protective love, and who had looked at him across a hospital room and decided in the span of an hour that the real version of him was acceptable. The weight of that, of what it meant to be the thing someone had imagined for 9 years and then to actually show up, settled into him and stayed. "I'm not going to be able to make up for it," he said. He wasn't asking for absolution. He was just saying the true thing. "No," Lena agreed. "You're not." She said it without cruelty, just with the same plainness she'd applied to everything. But that's not actually the question she's asking. The question she's asking is whether you're here now. That's all she's been asking. He looked at his daughter sleeping in the afternoon light. "I'm here now," he said. "Then start there," Lena said. Maya woke up 40 minutes later with the abrupt, full consciousness return of someone who doesn't transition gradually. One moment she was asleep, and the next she was sitting up, assessing the room, locating Ethan in the plastic chair, locating Lena at the window where she'd moved to take a call from her office, and reaching immediately for her notebook. "The secondary questions," she said by way of greeting. "Good afternoon," Ethan said. "Sorry," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "I always wake up like this. Mom says it's alarming." She found the page she wanted. "Okay. Secondary questions. These are more about—" She considered the right word. "Context." "Go ahead," he said. "Do you like your work?" she asked. He blinked. "That's your first secondary question?" "It's important," she said. "Whether people like what they do changes how they do it. If you don't like it, it shows, even when you're good at it." She looked at him with those evaluative eyes. "I want to know if you actually like it, or if you just do it." "Both," he said honestly. "There are parts I genuinely love, the design problems, the early architecture stage when you're building something new and you don't know yet exactly what shape it's going to take. I love that." He paused. "There are parts I don't love, the investor management, the performance of it. The profile pieces where someone writes about you like you're a symbol instead of a person." Maya nodded. "The Forbes piece," she said. "The Forbes piece." "It was a little thin," she said. "I thought your actual work was more interesting than what they focused on." "Most people find the story more interesting than the work," he said. "Most people are wrong about that," she said, with the serene certainty of someone who has thought about this and reached a conclusion. She wrote something in her notebook. "Second question. Do you have siblings?" "One," he said. "A sister, Claire. She's 28. She's a—" He stopped. "Actually, she's the reason I met your mother again." Maya looked up. "She arranged the dinner." "She arranged the dinner. She knew your mother from a renovation project, and she knew I was—" He thought about how to say it accurately. "She knew I was getting worse at being a person, and she thought reintroducing me to someone from before I got like that might help." Maya absorbed this. "Did she know about me?" "No," he said. "She didn't know about you. Nobody did." "So she was just trying to fix you and accidentally fixed everything," Maya said. He almost smiled. "That's one way to put it." "It's a pretty good way," she said. "Does she know now? Your sister?" "Not yet," he said. "I'm going to call her tonight." Maya nodded and made a note. He had given up trying to understand what she was writing. It seemed to be a system entirely her own, some combination of record-keeping and processing that she applied to things she wanted to retain. "Third question," she said. "This one is—" She looked at the notebook, then at him. "When you left, when you made the decision to leave, did you think about my mom after? Like, later?" The room was quiet. Lena was still at the window, her back to them, and he wasn't sure whether she was still on her call or had ended it and was simply standing there, giving them the distance. "Yes," he said. "Frequently." "How frequently?" "Often enough that it was probably affecting my work," he said. "For about 2 years. Then I got better at not thinking about it." He paused. "Which is maybe worse, actually, getting good at not thinking about something. Maya wrote, "My mom got good at that too," she said, not thinking about it. She said it matter-of-factly, not to hurt him, just reporting what she'd observed. She's very good at deciding to be practical. It's useful. But sometimes I think it means she doesn't let herself want things. She looked up. That's my observation. She'd probably disagree. You think she doesn't let herself want things, he said carefully. I think she decided a long time ago that wanting things that depended on other people was risky, Maya said, and that it was safer to want things she could control. So she built the business herself, and she raised me herself, and she made everything work herself. She looked at her notebook. She's very good at it, but I think she's also tired. She glanced at Lena's back at the window. Don't tell her I said that. I won't, he said. She'd say I'm being dramatic, Maya said, but I'm not. I just pay attention. He looked at his daughter for a moment, at this child who had spent 9 years watching her mother with careful, devoted attention, learning the shape of her silences, cataloging her habits, noting the difference between the exhaustion she showed and the exhaustion she didn't. And he felt something he'd been feeling in pieces since the night before finally assembling itself into a form he could recognize. He had not just missed a daughter. He had missed a decade of this particular kind of witness, this specific, irreplaceable record of a person being known. You're not dramatic, he said. You're observant. People use dramatic to mean observant when they don't want to engage with what you've observed, Maya said. She ate a blueberry. She'd been rationing them, he noticed, making the pint last. One more. Last question. She looked at the notebook, then closed it. Are you going to try to be with my mom again? He went very still. From the window, Lena said, Maya, in a voice that was a warning, and also, underneath it, something else entirely. It's a valid question, Maya said, without looking away from Ethan. I'm not trying to make it weird. I just want to know what I'm looking at, so I can understand what kind of situation this is. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Lena, who had turned from the window and was standing with her arms crossed, and an expression that was complicated, guarded, and also entirely unable to fully conceal the fact that she was waiting for the answer too. That's something your mother gets to decide, he said. Not me. I walked away and she raised you and built a life, and I don't have a vote in that unless she gives me one. He held Maya's gaze. What I can tell you is what I want, and what I want is to be in this room tomorrow and the day after that, with you. That part I'm sure about. He paused. The rest I'm going to let be whatever it is, and try not to push for more than I've earned. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Lena. Something passed between them. Mother and daughter, in the language they'd built over 9 years of being each other's entire family. And then Maya nodded once, the way she nodded when a data point had been received and filed. Okay, she said, and opened her notebook again. Lena turned back to the window, but not before he saw her expression do something it hadn't done since the restaurant the night before. Something that was smaller and quieter than the other things. Something that might have been, in better light, the earliest suggestion of relief. He stayed until 6. He would have stayed longer, but Sophie texted at 5:48, a text that read simply, Dad? With no other content, which was Sophie's way of asking whether he existed and was planning to come home, a check-in she performed when his schedule became unpredictable, and she didn't want to say she was anxious about it because she'd decided at some point that anxious was not a quality she wanted to claim. He showed Maya the text. My other daughter, he said. The word still felt new in his mouth, other daughter, like a configuration of sounds he was learning to produce correctly. Maya read the text with focused attention. She texts economically, she said. That's just one word and a punctuation mark. She's concise, he said. I'm concise too, Maya said. She seemed to find this interesting, the parallel. What's she like? She's 9 years older than she acts, he said. She reads everything she can get her hands on. She argues with my presentations. She told me recently that I'm bad at being a person, but that she loves me more than anyone. He paused. I think you'd find each other challenging in an interesting way. Maya looked at him with that specific expression, the one where she was processing and deciding simultaneously. She knows about me? Not yet, he said. I'm going to tell her soon. How soon? This week, he said. Tonight? She pressed. He held her gaze. She was 9, and she was also completely clear-eyed about what she wanted. And what she wanted, he was understanding, was to not be a secret, to not be the thing that existed in a category separate from everything else. Tonight, he said. I'll tell her tonight. Something in Maya relaxed, subtly, in the shoulders, in the set of her jaw. Okay, she said. He stood up. He took his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Maya, who was looking at him with that calibrating attention, and he thought about all the things he wanted to say and the fact that most of them were things he'd need years to demonstrate rather than minutes to articulate. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. 8:30, 9. Blueberries are gone, she said. I'll get more. You don't have to, she said. I was just noting it. I know, he said. I'll get more anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil and turned back to her drawing, and he understood that as the dismissal and the acceptance simultaneously, both things in the same gesture, which was very Maya and which he was already learning to read. He stopped by Lena on his way out. She was back in her chair now, the sketchbook closed, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that was probably cold. I told her I'd tell Sophie tonight, he said quietly. Lena nodded. That's good, she said. Sophie should know. Is there anything you need? He asked. Before I go, from the outside world, groceries, anything. We're fine, she said. Automatic, immediate. He looked at her. Lena. She stopped, pressed her lips together for a moment. There's a bag in the closet. I've been staying here nights and going home mornings. The bag has 2 days of clothes in it, and I haven't had time to... Give me your address, he said. I'll have someone pick up whatever you need and bring it here. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. That's not the question. She looked at him. The complicated expression again, with the thing underneath it that she managed with great discipline. Then she took out her phone and typed something, and his phone buzzed with her address. A Red Hook address. A neighborhood he knew mostly by proximity to other places. Thank you, he said. Don't make it... She stopped, started again. Don't make it a thing. It's just a bag. It's just a bag, he agreed. She held his gaze for a moment, and there was something in it. Not warm exactly, not open exactly, but not the distance she'd been maintaining either. Something was shifting in the architecture of how she looked at him. Not dramatically, not quickly, but shifting. Go home to Sophie, she said. He went. The cab ride uptown was different from the night before. Less stunned, more settled. Not settled in the sense of resolved, but settled in the sense of having located the actual dimensions of the thing he was dealing with. The night before he'd been in free fall. Now he had the floor under him, even if the floor was irregular and the room was still tilted and he couldn't see all the walls yet. He stopped at a pharmacy on 79th Street and bought colored pencils. The good kind. The ones in the long flat tin that Sophie had been requesting for 3 months. And then he went home. Mrs. Okafor, who lived 2 floors down and had been Sophie's after-school arrangement for the past year, had already gone. Sophie was at the kitchen island with her homework open and a bowl of cereal she'd made herself for dinner, which was a quiet accusation he was going to have to absorb. I know, he said, before she could say anything. I should have texted about dinner. I'm sorry. Sophie looked at the cereal. It's fine, she said. I made it work. You shouldn't have had to. He set the colored pencils on the counter beside her. She looked at them, then at him, and he could see her deciding whether to be mollified. She decided to be mollified. She picked up the tin and turned it in her hands with the careful attention she gave things she'd been wanting. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. He sat down on the stool across from her. How was school? Fine. We had a sub in math who didn't know what he was doing, which was annoying. She opened her cereal bowl and took a spoon. How was your thing? The company thing is better, he said. Not fixed, but better. She nodded. She'd been monitoring the news alert he'd accidentally set on her tablet 2 years ago. She'd told him about it once, and he'd never removed it, partly because he found it useful to know she was paying attention. She probably knew as much about the Singapore situation as Richard Holt at this point. And the personal thing, she said it carefully, the way she repeated his language back to him when she was tracking something. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen island, at her gray eyes and her grandmother's assessment in them, and the colored pencil tin she was still holding because she hadn't wanted to put it down. "Sophie," he said, "I need to tell you something." She went still in the particular way she went still when she knew something significant was coming. Not afraid, just preparing, collecting herself. "Okay," she said. He thought about how to do this. He'd been thinking about it for the last hour in pieces, and he still didn't have a clean version of it because there wasn't one. There was only the true version, which was untidy and incomplete and would raise more questions than it answered. "Last night at dinner," he said, "I met someone I knew a long time ago, before you were born, a woman named Lena." Sophie was very still. We were close when I was 22, he said, and then I made some choices that weren't good ones, and we lost each other. And when I saw her last night, I found out—" He stopped, looked at his daughter. "I found out that I have another daughter, a girl named Maya. She's 9. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator made its small sound. Outside the window, the city went on. Sophie looked at him. He couldn't read her expression. It was doing too many things at once. 9, she said. 9 years old, he said. Same age as you. She's my... Sophie stopped, working through the logistics of it. She's my sister? Half-sister, he said. Yes. Another silence. He waited. Sophie processed information by going quiet first and then asking questions in a sequence, and he'd learned over 9 years not to fill the quiet. You didn't know about her, Sophie said. It wasn't a question. She was confirming an understanding. No, he said. I didn't know. Her mother didn't. There were reasons she didn't tell me. I'm not going to say they were wrong. He paused. I found out last night. And you went to meet her? Sophie said. Last night, after dinner, you went? Yes, he said. That's why you came home so late. Yes. Sophie set the colored pencil tin on the counter. She looked at the kitchen island surface for a moment, at a scratch in the laminate she'd made 3 years ago with a compass from her geometry set. Is she okay? She asked. Maya. It caught him off guard. The immediate directness of the concern, the fact that her first question was not about him or about her own position in this new arrangement, but about the other child. He should not have been surprised. It was very Sophie. She's in the hospital, he said. She's sick. That's part of how this all came to the surface. Her mother needed to find me for medical information. He paused. She's being treated. The doctors are optimistic. Sophie nodded slowly, still processing. What's she like? She asked. He thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being so specific that Sophie had nothing to discover for herself. She's very smart, he said. She reads everything. She's designing a hospital from her hospital bed. Something moved across Sophie's face. She draws buildings? She's been designing buildings since she was 6, he said. Her mother is an architect. Does she know about me? Sophie asked. She knows you exist, he said. She knows I have a daughter named Sophie. She wanted me to tell you about her right away. Tonight. She didn't want to be a secret. Sophie looked up at him. Something was working across her face, the rapid, multi-track processing he recognized. She sounds like me, she said. In some ways, he said, she's also very different from you. Different how? She's more deliberate, he said. She thinks for a long time before she says things. She has a notebook where she writes down questions and categories before she asks them. He paused. You think out loud. She thinks inside and then speaks. Sophie absorbed this. We'd probably argue, she said. Probably, he said. I think you'd find each other interesting, though. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then, can I meet her? When she's feeling well enough, he said, and when it feels right. It'll take some arranging. She needs time to adjust to new people. I won't be too much, Sophie said, and there was something in it, a self-awareness that was almost adult about her own particular intensity, her own way of filling a room. I can be less too much. I know you can, he said. Sophie picked up the colored pencils again, turned the tin, set it down. Dad, she said. Yeah. Are you okay? She said. Like, actually. He looked at his daughter, the daughter he'd raised, the one who'd been with him, who'd corrected his board presentations at age 7 and told him he was bad at being a person, and still, every Sunday without fail, asked if he was happy. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I think I will be. She looked at him for a long moment with those gray eyes. Then she got up from her stool and came around the kitchen island and hugged him, which she didn't do frequently. She was not an unsolicited hugger, had never been. It required a particular kind of moment for her to decide it was the right move. He put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder the same way she had this morning, and they stayed like that for a moment in the kitchen, with the refrigerator humming and the city outside. You should eat something, she said into his shoulder. Real food, not cereal. I know, he said. I can make eggs, she said. I know how. You've made eggs twice in your life, he said. And they were fine both times, she said, pulling back with the dignity of someone who stands behind their work. He almost smiled. They were fine, he confirmed. She made eggs. They were, again, fine. He ate them standing at the counter while Sophie sat on the island and opened the colored pencil tin and arranged the pencils by color family in the particular way she had, which involved considerable deliberation about where the borderline colors belonged. Ethan, she said. He looked at her. You called me Sophie, she said. I always call you Sophie. You called me Sophie just now like you were talking to a person, she said. Not like you were talking to your kid. She looked at him. There's a difference. He looked at his daughter, who was 9 years old and sat on his kitchen counter, arranging pencils, and had just articulated a distinction that most adults managed without words. Is that okay? He said. Yeah, she said. It's good, actually. She held a blue-green pencil up to the kitchen light, examining it. It means you're treating me like someone worth talking to, which I am. I know you are, he said. I know you know, she said. I'm just saying. He took his plate to the sink. He washed it. The small maintenance of ordinary life. The thing you do because it needs doing, and because doing it is a way of being present in your own kitchen on a Tuesday night. Then he dried his hands and looked at his daughter on the counter and said, I have to call Aunt Claire tonight. Sophie looked up. Does she know? She arranged the dinner, he said. She didn't know what she'd arranged. Sophie blinked. She introduced you to Maya's mom? Without knowing who she was to me, he said. She thought she was setting me up on a blind date. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's insane. That's one word for it, he said. She's going to think it's her fault, Sophie said, because Sophie knew her aunt and knew exactly how Claire Calloway processed things, with generous quantities of both guilt and love, in that order. She's going to think it's the best thing she ever did, he said. Eventually. After the guilt, Sophie said. After the guilt, he agreed. He called Claire at 8:30, after Sophie was in bed. He sat on the couch in the living room with the lights low and the city beyond the windows doing its usual nighttime thing, and he told his sister everything. Not in order, not with the clean narrative structure he applied to business presentations. Just the whole of it, the way it had actually happened, from the restaurant to the hospital, from the photo on the bookshelf to the notebook with its logical groupings. Claire was quiet for so long after he finished that he checked the phone screen to make sure the call was still connected. Claire, he said. I'm here, she said. Her voice was strange, thick in a way he recognized. Don't cry, he said. I'm not crying, she said. I'm sitting here. A pause. I've been setting you up on dates for 3 years, Ethan. I've sent you to dinner with 12 different women. I never... She stopped. I hired her firm in January. She came over to look at the apartment, and I showed her a photo of you and Sophie on my fridge. And she looked at it for a second, and I thought she was just being polite. And then she said, Your nephew looks like someone I used to know. And I thought, a sound. I thought she meant a general resemblance to someone. I had no idea. She was protecting herself, he said. She didn't know if she could trust where it would go. Ethan, Claire said, you have a daughter. I know. Besides Sophie. I know. Are you... She stopped. How are you? Are you... What is this doing to you? He thought about the honest answer to that, the full, unfiltered version. It's the hardest thing that's happened to me since Sophie was born, he said. And also the most... I don't have the word. Significant, maybe, in the sense of changing the shape of things. Are you angry? Claire said. At Lena? For not telling you? He thought about it. He'd been thinking about it all day, in the spaces between everything else. I understand why she didn't, he said. I walked out on her with no explanation and didn't pick up her calls. She had every reason to believe that telling me would get her nothing and cost her something. He paused. I think I'm more angry at my 22-year-old self than at her. That's, Claire said. That's actually very mature of you. Don't sound so surprised. I'm a little surprised, she said. You've been emotionally avoidant for approximately a decade. I know, he said. I say that with love, she said. I know that too, he said. She was quiet for a moment. What happens now? I go back to the hospital tomorrow, he said. And the day after that. And I figure out how to be part of something I walked away from before I understood what it was. He leaned back against the couch. I'm going to restructure some things at work. Make room. I can't run the company the way I've been running it and also I can't do both of those things in the same amount of time I've been doing one of them. Richard's going to have a heart attack, Claire said. Richard's going to be fine, he said. He's been carrying more than his title calls for years. It's time to make it official. Another pause. Can I come to the hospital? Claire said. When it's appropriate. When she's ready for more people. Her voice was careful, wanting to be right about this. I want to meet her. I'll ask Lena, he said. Soon. And Lena, Claire said. Very carefully. In the tone of someone who has been observing her brother for 32 years and knows which questions to approach from the side. What about Lena? He said. Are you... She stopped. Never mind, you don't have to answer that. I don't know the answer, he said. That's not me deflecting. I genuinely don't know yet. There's a lot of other things to figure out before that's even a question with an answer. Okay, she said. A pause. She's good, though? From what you can tell? He thought about Lena in the hospital chair with the sketchbook open on her knee, still doing her work because the work still existed regardless of what else was happening. He thought about her saying, She's extraordinary, Ethan. You have no idea in the restaurant, and her voice cracking just slightly around the edges of it. He thought about 23 years old and alone, and a one-bedroom in Flatbush, and 2 jobs and no family money, and raising someone who grew up to design hospitals from her hospital bed. She's exceptional, he said. She always was. Claire said nothing for a moment, then, I'm sorry, she said, that the dinner happened the way it did and not earlier, some better way. Don't be, he said. I'm not sure there was a better way. I'm not sure I would have been ready for a better way. He looked at the city through the windows. I think I needed to be this person first, before I could be the right one in that room. Are you the right one now? She asked. He thought about the plastic chair and the blueberries and the notebook with its logical groupings. He thought about Maya looking at him and saying, behavior is data with the serene certainty of someone who had been paying attention her whole life. I'm trying to be, he said. I think that has to be enough to start. He went to bed at 10:30. He lay in the dark and thought about the shape of the next week. The Singapore follow-up, the board communication, the restructuring conversation with Richard, the schedule changes he was going to have to make and defend and hold against the pressure that would inevitably come from people who'd relied on his particular brand of total availability for 6 years. He thought about Sophie asleep down the hall with her new colored pencils on her bedside table because she'd wanted them close. He thought about Maya in room 714 with her notebook and her drawing and the monitor counting green in the dark. He thought about Lena sitting in her chair, the sketchbook on her knee, pencil moving in the practiced economy of someone who had learned to do her best work in the margins of whatever else was happening. He thought about all of it at once and felt the enormity of it, not as a threat, not as something crushing, but as the actual dimensions of his life now, finally visible, finally the right size. large enough to require more than he'd been giving, real enough to be worth giving it. He fell asleep thinking about blueberries. Not frozen, fresh. He was up at 5:45 before the alarm, which was nothing new. But the thing that was new was what happened next. Instead of reaching immediately for his phone and the overnight messages and the first crisis of the day, he lay there for a minute and did nothing. Just lay there in the early dark and let himself be in the day before the day required anything from him. He hadn't done that in years. He wasn't sure he'd ever done it deliberately. It lasted about 90 seconds before his mind started running the morning's logistics. But those 90 seconds were there. They happened. He counted them as something. He was out of the apartment by 8, blueberries in the paper bag, laptop in his bag for the Singapore prep, coffee in the travel cup. Sophie had left him a note on the counter in her small, precise handwriting. "Tell Maya I hope she feels better. S." He looked at the note for a moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He walked to the hospital through the morning city. He'd decided to walk. It was 20 blocks. He had the time. And the morning was doing what summer mornings do in New York. That specific early heat that hasn't committed yet. The air still carrying the overnight cool in the shadows and the warmth starting in the open streets. He walked through it with the paper bag and the laptop bag and the coffee and the note in his pocket from one daughter to the other. He arrived at NYU Langone at 8:47. He took the elevator to the 7th floor. He turned right at the nurse's station. He walked to room 714. He stopped outside the door and listened for a moment. He could hear, faintly, 2 voices, Lena's and Maya's. He couldn't make out the words, but he could make out the rhythm of it, the easy practice back and forth of 2 people who had been talking to each other for 9 years and had built their own language inside that time. He knocked, which he hadn't done the first night, which felt right now as an acknowledgement that this room had a life before him and would have one with him, and that entering required the small, deliberate courtesy of asking first. "Come in," Lena said. He opened the door. Maya was sitting up with her notebook open, and what appeared to be 3 printed pages from a medical journal spread across her blanket. The clinical trial data, he realized, that she'd had the nurses print. She looked up when he came in with the same evaluative attention as always, and then looked at the paper bag, and something in her face did the small, controlled movement that was Maya's version of pleased. "You got more?" she said. "I said I would," he said. "I know," she said. "But people say things." She held out her hand for the bag with the exact same gesture as the morning before. Direct, no performance around it, just practical. He handed it over. He looked at Lena, who was watching him from her chair with the complicated expression, which this morning had slightly fewer of its guarded components than it had the day before. Not much, but measurably. "Sophie left something for Maya," he said. He took the folded note from his pocket and held it out. "She wrote it this morning before school." Lena looked at the note. Then she looked at him. She didn't say anything, but something moved across her face that she didn't manage to contain before he saw it. He gave the note to Maya, who unfolded it with careful fingers and read it. Her face did something he hadn't seen it do before. Something younger and more open, not the evaluative expression, not the processing expression, something that was simply response. "Sophie," she said, testing the name. "Sophie," he confirmed. Maya looked at the note for a moment longer. Then she folded it with the same care she'd unfolded it and put it in her notebook, and looked at Ethan with those dark eyes that had his shape around them. "I have tertiary questions," she said. "Of course you do," he said, and sat down in the plastic chair. Lena made a sound from her chair that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else, and was, he thought, one of the most real sounds he'd heard in a very long time. The tertiary questions took 3 days. Not 3 days of continuous questioning. Maya wasn't relentless in the way that word usually implies. Wasn't the kind of child who wore you down through repetition or volume. She was relentless in the quieter, more durable way of someone who simply didn't forget things and didn't let them go until she understood them fully. She'd ask one question, receive an answer, write something in her notebook, and then sit with it for hours or a day before the next one arrived. The questions came in the morning, mostly, when her pain levels were lowest and her mind was sharpest. and they covered territory that ranged from the technical. She wanted to understand the full architecture history of Callaway systems, which took the better part of a Wednesday afternoon, to the personal, which she approached with the same systematic care but a different kind of attention. More still. More deliberate about what she did with the answers. She asked him once, on the Thursday morning, why he'd chosen technology. Not how. She'd already researched the how extensively. But why? What had made him believe, at 22, that this particular thing was worth everything else? He thought about it for a long moment before he answered. He was getting better at that, at not filling her silences with the first available response, at sitting with a question until he had something true to say rather than something adequate. I think I believed, he said finally, that if I built something real enough, something that actually worked and actually mattered in the world, I'd stop feeling like I was going to disappear. He paused. Like I needed to make something that would exist after me to prove I was actually here. Maya looked at him. That's a strange reason to build a company, she said. It is, he agreed. Did it work? He looked at her. For a while, he said. For longer than it should have. He looked at his hands, and then it stopped working, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I just worked harder. Maya was quiet for a moment, writing something. My mom does that too, she said. Works harder when something stops making sense. She looked at her notebook. I think it's a way of not having to figure out the actual problem. It is, he said. It's very effective at that. But only temporarily, she said. Only temporarily, he confirmed. She wrote something else. Then she looked up. I don't think you're going to disappear, she said. It was delivered with the same direct practicality she applied to everything, without sentimentality or performance. Just a conclusion she'd reached and decided to share. I've been watching. You come back every day. You texted Mom last night to ask about my pain levels, even though she didn't ask you to. You brought Sophie's note. You remembered that I said the hospital Wi-Fi was decent, and you stopped asking to use the nurse's station. She looked at him. Behavior is data. The data is consistent so far. He looked at his daughter for a long moment and felt something he was still learning to sit with. The particular quality of being seen by someone who was doing it without any agenda other than accuracy. So far, he said. So far, she confirmed. I'll keep updating. He accepted that. It was more than fair. The Singapore deal closed on the Friday of that first week. Not the full deal, not every term they'd originally wanted, but a revised agreement that preserved the core partnership and adjusted the timeline in ways that Ethan could defend to the board and that Park Jae-won could defend to his own consortium. It wasn't the outcome Ethan would have chosen 6 months ago. It was an outcome he could live with, which he was learning was a different and sometimes more important standard. Richard called to tell him. Ethan was in the hospital corridor on a coffee run for himself and Lena, walking back from the machine near the elevators with 2 cups that were going to be mediocre, regardless of what he did with them. It's done, Richard said. Park signed the revised terms 20 minutes ago. Legal is processing. Good, Ethan said. Good, Richard repeated in a tone that suggested he'd expected a more expansive response. Ethan, we were 3 hours from losing this deal on Tuesday night. It's Friday and we closed it. I want to be clear about what just happened. I know what happened, Ethan said. He turned the corner back toward 714. And I know what it cost us relative to the original terms. We're going to need to adjust our March projections. We're already on it, Richard said. I want to talk about the restructuring conversation you mentioned. My schedule is next week, Ethan said, Tuesday. I'll come in. We'll sit down. He paused outside the door to Maya's room. And Richard, I want you to know that the restructuring is about making the company more sustainable, not about anything being wrong with how you've been running things. You've been carrying too much. I'm going to make that official, and then I'm going to take some of it back from you in a different configuration. A pause. That's the least specific professional statement you've ever made to me, Richard said. I know, Ethan said. I'll be more specific on Tuesday. He ended the call and pushed the door open with his shoulder, both coffee cups in his hands, and nearly walked into Lena, who was standing just inside the door with her phone to her ear and the expression she wore when a work call had gone sideways. She held up one finger. Give me a moment. and he stepped around her and delivered Maya's morning blueberries, which he'd picked up on the way in, and settled into the plastic chair while Maya continued reviewing the printed clinical trial data, and Lena paced a small circuit near the window in the focused, controlled way of someone managing something professionally difficult. He watched her without appearing to watch her. She'd been dealing with her firm remotely all week. Her business partner, Ren, a Korean-American architect she'd met in her second year of independent practice, had been covering client communications, but there were decisions only Lena could make and calls only she could take, and she took them from hospital corridors and waiting rooms and the small family lounge down the hall, always returning to the room between them, always with her face resettled into something manageable before she came through the door. She was doing too much. He could see it, not in a dramatic way, not in a way she'd acknowledge if he said it directly, but in the particular texture of her tiredness, which had changed over the week from the acute exhaustion of crisis into something more chronic and structural. The kind of tired that accumulates when you've been the only load-bearing wall for 9 years and the load has increased. He'd been thinking about how to say something about that. He hadn't found the right way yet. With Lena, the wrong framing had a way of producing exactly the opposite of the intended result. He'd figured that out by Wednesday, when he'd suggested she go home and sleep for a full night, and she'd looked at him with an expression that made clear the suggestion, however well-intentioned, had landed as an implication that she needed to be told to take care of herself. She didn't need to be told. She needed the conditions that made it possible. She ended the call and came back into the room and picked up the mediocre coffee without complaining about it being mediocre. "Problem?" he asked. "Client on the Williamsburg project wants to move a load-bearing wall," she said. Ren already told him no. He called me to tell him no again. She sat in her chair. I told him no again. "Did it take?" "It'll take until Monday, and then he'll call back," she said. She looked at Maya, who was reading and hadn't looked up. "He's the third client this week who's called to ask me something Ren already answered." "Because they think you'll say something different?" "Because they think I'm the one who matters, and he's the one who manages me," she said, with the flat precision of someone who has been navigating this particular dynamic for 7 years. "We've been partners for 4 years. Our names are both on the door, and there are still clients who treat him like my assistant." "Has it always been like that?" "It's gotten better," she said. "Slower than it should, but better." She drank the coffee. She looked at the middle distance for a moment. "I need to hire someone," she said, half to herself. "Another architect. Someone who can take the client relationship weight while Ren handles operations. I've been saying I'd do it for a year." "What stopped you?" "Money," she said, "and time, and the fact that every time I sit down to draft the job posting, I get pulled into something else." She looked at her coffee cup. "The firm has been growing faster than I scaled the staff for it, which is a good problem, but it's still a problem." He thought about what Maya had said, that Lena had made everything work herself always, because she'd decided that wanting things that depended on other people was risky. He thought about a job posting that had been half written in someone's head for a year. "Let me help with that," he said. Lena looked at him. "Not with money," he said quickly, because he could see the response forming. That's not what I mean. I mean, I've hired a lot of people. I know what a good job posting looks like, and I know the networks where the right candidates are. Let me draft it with you, when you have an hour." She held his gaze for a moment, assessing, looking for the angle. "Just drafting," he said. "You don't draft things," she said. "You build systems and make decisions." "I can draft things," he said. "I built the first company with a 6-person team and wrote half the documentation myself." She was quiet for a moment, then, "When Maya's sleeping," she said, "this afternoon." "This afternoon," he agreed. Maya, without looking up from her clinical trial data, said, "You should also talk to her about the Red Hook project." Both of them looked at her. "What Red Hook project?" Ethan said. "The community center renovation," Maya said, still reading. "Mom has been trying to get funding for 6 months. It's a historic building. She has the design ready. The community organization that owns it doesn't have the capital." She turned a page. "She won't ask for help with it because she doesn't want it to look like she's using the situation." She looked up briefly. "But it's a good project. I've seen the plans. The structural approach is elegant." "Maya," Lena said in the tone that meant the information was accurate, and the disclosure was still unwelcome. Behavior is data, Maya said serenely, including the behavior of not asking for help when you need it. Lena pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan with an expression that was composed of equal parts exasperation at her daughter and something more complicated than that. "It's a good project," she said. "That part is true. The rest of it is also true," Maya said, and returned to her reading. Lena looked at Ethan. He looked at her. He was very careful about his expression, about not letting it show the things it might show if he wasn't careful. The fact that watching Lena Brooks be outmaneuvered by a 9-year-old she'd raised to think exactly this way was one of the most genuinely enjoyable things he'd experienced in a long time. "The Red Hook Project," he said, carefully neutral, "is not why we're here," Lena said, "and is not something I need." "I know," he said, "but I'd like to hear about it when Maya's sleeping, along with the job posting." She looked at him for a long moment. The guarded components of her expression were still there. They were always there. They'd been built up over too many years to dissolve in a week. But around the edges of them, something was shifting. Had been shifting, he'd been watching it, the slow renegotiation of what she was willing to let be shared. "Fine," she said, "when Maya's sleeping." "I'm not going to sleep for hours," Maya said, without looking up. "You will when the medication kicks in," Lena said. Maya considered this. "Probably accurate," she conceded. The second week in the hospital was different from the first. The first week had been about establishing the fact of things, the fact of Ethan, the fact of his presence, the fact of what he was and wasn't and intended to be. The second week was about the texture of it, the ordinary, unremarkable, sometimes tedious texture of being in a hospital room day after day with people you are still learning. He learned that Maya's pain was worst in the mornings, and that she managed it by working, that the drawing and the notebooks and the reading weren't just interest, they were also a specific and self-developed coping mechanism, a way of directing her attention away from her body and toward a problem she could engage with. He learned that she had a complicated relationship with sleep, that she resisted it because she didn't like losing the hours, and that Lena had a specific and long-practiced way of getting her to rest that involved reading aloud from whatever Maya was currently studying, because Maya would inevitably argue with the text, and the arguing would tire her out. He learned that Lena took her coffee black in the morning and with 1 sugar in the afternoon, that she had a habit of sketching when she was thinking through a problem she hadn't verbalized yet, that she was harder on herself about the things she hadn't done than she was on anyone else about anything, and that she had a laugh. He heard it first on the Wednesday of the second week when Maya said something dry about the structural integrity of the hospital's original 1960s build that was low and quick and completely unguarded, and that he had not heard in 10 years and recognized instantly. He learned that the two of them had a universe between them, private references and shared history, and the kind of wordless communication that only comes from being someone's entire world for 9 years. He was outside that universe. He understood that. He wasn't trying to get inside it so much as trying to find the place at its edge where he could be useful without displacing anything. Sophie came on a Saturday, 12 days into Maya's treatment. He'd asked Lena first, several times. Not pushing, asking and accepting her answer each time, which had been not yet twice, and I need to ask Maya once, and then, finally, on the Friday afternoon, a text that said simply, "Tomorrow is fine. Come at 11. Bring her." He told Sophie that night. She was at the kitchen table doing homework with the new colored pencils, using the green one for something she wouldn't explain. He sat across from her and said Lena and Maya had said yes, tomorrow at 11, and Sophie set the pencil down and looked at him with the gray eyes and said, "What should I bring?" "What do you mean?" "When you visit someone in the hospital," Sophie said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who should already know it, "you bring something. It's basic social protocol." "She has blueberries," he said. "I bring them." "That's you," Sophie said. "I need my own thing." She thought about it seriously. "What is she like, besides buildings?" He thought. "She's been reading medical journals," he said. "And before that, from what Lena said, she was working through a book about infrastructure engineering. She likes systems. She likes understanding how things are put together. Sophie was quiet for a moment, in the focused way of someone actually solving a problem. Then she went to her room and came back 10 minutes later with a book, one of her own, a book about urban planning she'd checked out from the library 2 months ago and hadn't returned because she was still reading sections of it. She put it on the table. "I'll give her this," she said, "but I want it back when she's done." He looked at the book, at his daughter's bookplate on the inside cover, Sophie Calloway, with a small drawing of a robot she'd added herself. "She'll give it back," he said. "I know she will," Sophie said. "I just want her to know it's mine, so she knows she can ask me about it after." She picked up the green pencil again. "Is that weird?" "No," he said. That's very smart." "I know," she said, and went back to her homework. He drove Sophie to the hospital the next morning, which he almost never did because Manhattan driving was an exercise in specific frustration, but it felt like the right mode of arrival. His car, the two of them, unhurried. Sophie was quiet in the passenger seat, in the way she was quiet before things she was nervous about, but wouldn't call nervous. She had the book in her lap, and she turned it in her hands twice and put it in her bag. "She's probably going to be direct," he said. "I'm direct," Sophie said. "You're a different kind of direct," he said. "She thinks everything through before she says it. So when she says something, she means it precisely." "So do I," Sophie said. "You also say 12 other things around it," he said. "She doesn't." Sophie considered this. "Okay," she said. "I'll pay attention." They took the elevator to the 7th floor. He let Sophie walk beside him rather than guiding her, and when they reached room 714, he knocked in the way he'd established. A specific knock, 2 and then 1, that Maya had started responding to by calling "come in" before his hand had fully left the door. He pushed it open. Lena was at the window. Maya was sitting up in bed with the notebook open, and she looked at the door and then at Sophie. And Sophie looked at Maya, and there was a moment, brief, specific, the kind that sometimes decides things, of two children assessing each other across a hospital room. Maya's assessment was visible in the way her assessments always were. She started at Sophie's face, moved to the bag she was carrying, came back to the face. Sophie's assessment was different. She took the room in first, the whole of it, and then narrowed to Maya, and her expression did the thing it did when she encountered something she found genuinely interesting. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hi," Maya said. A pause. Not uncomfortable, more like two systems locating each other's frequency. "You're taller than I thought you'd be," Maya said. "Everyone says that," Sophie said. "It's the genes." She looked at Ethan briefly. "Apparently." Maya almost smiled, the left side leading asymmetrical movement. Sophie saw it. He watched her notice it and file it. "I brought you something," Sophie said. She took the book from her bag and walked to the bed and held it out. "It's mine. I want it back when you're done, but I thought you might want to read it." Maya took the book and looked at the cover, then opened it to the bookplate. Sophie Calloway, the robot drawing. She ran one finger across the robot, which had the same expressive eyebrows as all of Sophie's robots, and then she looked up. "Urban planning," she said. "Chapter 7 is about load distribution in city infrastructure," Sophie said. "It's actually about buildings, but on a bigger scale. I thought you'd probably already know most of it, but there are some parts in Chapter 9 that I didn't know, and I've been thinking about them." "What parts?" Maya said. "About how the spaces between buildings matter as much as the buildings themselves," Sophie said. "Like, the negative space is structural too." Maya looked at the book, then at Sophie. "I've been thinking about something similar," she said, "with hospital design. The corridors and the waiting areas, they're not just connective tissue, they're doing load-bearing emotional work. If you get them wrong, the whole building feels wrong, even if all the rooms are right." Sophie stared at her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." They looked at each other. Something settled between them. Not friendship yet, too early for that, but the recognition of a shared frequency. The particular relief of finding someone who thinks in a compatible way. Lena looked at Ethan from across the room. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say that would be better than what was already happening. Sophie sat in the chair that had been Lena's, Lena had moved to lean against the windowsill, and they talked about the book and about buildings and about a community center in Red Hook that Maya had seen the plans for and Sophie had not but wanted to, and about whether cities were technologies or organisms or both. And Ethan sat in his plastic chair and listened and felt the strangeness and the rightness of it in equal measure, the way you feel things that are genuinely new. At one point, Sophie asked Maya what it was like being in the hospital for weeks, and Maya was quiet for a moment and then said, "The worst part is that the days are all the same. I can't tell Tuesday from Friday. Everything is the same temperature." Sophie nodded slowly and said, "That sounds like it would make everything feel unreal." And Maya looked at her and said quietly, "Yeah, that's exactly what it does." It was the most unguarded thing he'd heard Maya say. He thought about what it cost her to say it, and about Sophie receiving it without making it into more than it was, and about how some people just know how to hold a thing without breaking it. He understood, watching them, that Sophie was going to be good for Maya in ways he hadn't predicted. Not because she was easy, Sophie was not easy, but because she was real. She didn't perform gentleness, and she didn't condescend, and she didn't treat Maya as a sick child so much as a person who happened to be in a hospital, which was exactly what Maya needed and had been getting mostly from Lena and Ethan and no one else. He also understood, watching Sophie, that Sophie had needed this too. Had needed a peer she could talk to in her own register, someone who matched her without competing, who thought in compatible ways without being identical. Sophie had friends at school, good ones, but there was a specific frequency she operated at that most 9-year-olds didn't share, and she'd been operating at it mostly alone. 2 children, each missing something the other had. The math of it was uncomfortable and also undeniable. Lena moved to stand beside him, close enough to speak quietly. "Sophie's good," she said. "I know," he said. "She knew how to talk to her," Lena said. Not surprised exactly. Assessing. "A lot of adults don't know how to talk to Maya. Sophie figured it out in about 2 minutes." "Sophie has a talent for that," he said. "She finds the register." He paused. "Maya's going to find Sophie a lot, too." Lena looked at the 2 girls. "I know," she said. Something in her voice was soft in a way it hadn't been before. Not vulnerable. That was the wrong word for Lena, who was not soft in the conventional sense, had never been. But present. More present than the careful, managed presence she'd been maintaining. He took the moment because it was there, and because he'd been thinking about how to say the next thing for 3 days. "I've been talking to my board," he said quietly, "about restructuring my role. I'm going to move to executive chair and promote Richard to CEO. It means I stay involved strategically, but I'm not running day-to-day operations." He kept his voice low, even. "It means I have time. Real time. Not hours I've carved out of something else, but actual time that belongs to this." Lena was still looking at the girls. "That's a significant decision," she said. "It's the right decision," he said. "The company is at a stage where Richard is genuinely better for that role than I am. I've been holding it because I didn't know what I'd do with myself without it." He paused. "I know what I'd do with myself now." She turned to look at him. Her expression was doing the complicated thing, all its components present. "Ethan," she said, "I'm not saying this to—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I want to be clear about what I'm asking for. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not attaching this to any expectation. I'm telling you because you have a right to know the actual shape of my availability, and because I don't want there to be any ambiguity about what I'm committing to." He looked at her. "I'm committing to Maya. I'm committing to being present and consistent and available. That's what I'm restructuring for." She held his gaze. "And me?" she said, very quietly. Not demanding, asking. The question of someone who has learned through necessity to be exact about what they need. "That's up to you," he said. "I meant what I said in the cab. You have a vote I don't get to override." He paused. "But I'll tell you what's true since you asked. What's true is that sitting in that restaurant looking at you across a decade and feeling like nothing had fundamentally changed, that was not the feeling of someone who'd moved on. I'd just gotten very good at pretending it was." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to push. I'm not going to make this a condition of anything, but I'm not going to pretend it's not true either." Lena looked at him for a long moment. The city behind her through the window was doing its morning thing, all motion and light, indifferent as always. Her expression was working through something, not the guarded version, not the managed version, the real version, which he was only beginning to see. "I'm not ready," she said. "For whatever you're describing, I'm not. There's too much still that I'm figuring out, and Maya is sick, and my business needs. There's too much." She stopped. "But I'm not saying no," she added. "I want to be accurate. I'm saying not yet, and not yet is different from no." "I know the difference," he said. "Okay," she said, and went back to watching her daughters. Her daughters. He heard it the moment he thought it, the word he hadn't consciously assembled, but which was already there, already accurate. Both of them, in the same room, the same register. Maya explaining to Sophie the specific structural failure of the hospital's original roofline, and Sophie pulling the urban planning book out of Maya's hands to find a comparable example, and the two of them arguing about it in the precise, engaged way of people who are enjoying the argument. He went and got 2 more mediocre coffees from the machine down the hall. He brought one back for Lena without asking, because he'd been doing it all week, and because it was a small thing, and small things were what you built trust out of when big things had already been broken. She took it without comment. That was also trust, in its way. The 3rd week of treatment was the hardest medically. Dr. Okafor had introduced the 2nd drug from the clinical trial on the Monday of that week, and Maya's body took 3 days to find its equilibrium with the new protocol. 3 days during which her pain levels spiked and her energy dropped to something closer to what Lena had been managing alone in January and February before Ethan existed in the picture. She slept more. She was quieter. She still had the notebook, but she wrote less in it, and the drawing of the hospital sat on the table mostly untouched. Ethan came every day. He sat in the plastic chair and he worked from his laptop when Maya was sleeping, and he talked with Maya when she was awake, and he brought blueberries every morning without fail, including the Thursday when he'd come from an early board call in Midtown and had stopped at 3 different markets to find ones that weren't overripe. He was not performing consistency. He was just being consistent, which was the only version that counted. On the Wednesday of that 3rd week, at about 2 in the afternoon, Maya woke up from a sleep and looked at him and said, with no preamble, "You know what I want to call you?" He looked up from his laptop. Lena, in her chair, went very still. "What?" he said. "Dad?" she said. "Is that okay?" The word arrived in the room with a weight that was entirely disproportionate to its size. 1 syllable, 3 letters. The most ordinary word in the English language, and also, in this room, in this moment, the most consequential thing she could have said. He didn't trust himself to speak for a moment. He took the moment and sat in it and felt the full weight of it. The 9 years behind the word, the 9 years ahead of it, the girl in the hospital bed who had spent 3 weeks running behavioral data and reached a conclusion she was willing to name. "Yes," he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. "That's okay, that's..." "Yes." Maya nodded. "Okay," she said. The same word she always used when a conclusion was reached and filed. Then she turned over and went back to sleep. Lena was looking at her sketchbook with an expression he wasn't meant to see, and he didn't make her know he'd seen it, just turned back to his laptop and let the moment be private for her, in the way it needed to be. He stared at his screen for a while without seeing it. Dad. He was Sophie's dad. He'd been Sophie's dad for 9 years, had assembled that identity from the ground up, had made every mistake available to a single father with a demanding career and an exceptional child, and had kept showing up anyway because showing up was the only thing you could do once the other options were off the table. He knew what it was to be called dad by one child. He understood its weight. This was different, not more, not less. Different in the specific way that Maya was different from Sophie, which was to say entirely. Same fundamental frequency, entirely different expression. This word, from this child, had 9 years of absence in it. It was not a simple word. It was the most complicated word he'd ever been given. He was going to earn it. Maya was discharged on a Friday afternoon at the end of the 4th week of treatment. The discharge was not a declaration of complete recovery. Dr. Okafor was careful and precise about that, sat with both Ethan and Lena and Maya, who had specifically requested to be present for the medical conversation and who had come prepared with 3 written questions. The bone marrow counts were responding. The second drug was doing its work. She would need outpatient treatment for another 8 weeks, weekly blood work, restrictions on exertion, monitoring. It was manageable. It was progress. Maya listened to all of it and asked her 3 questions and wrote down the answers and then said, "When can I go to a building site?" Dr. Okafor looked at her. "Which building site?" "My mom's community center project in Red Hook," Maya said. "They broke ground. I've seen the photos. I want to see it in person." Dr. Okafor said 6 weeks minimum and possibly 8, and Maya wrote that down with the expression of someone who has received a timeline and is already calculating how to optimize the waiting period. They left the hospital in the early afternoon. Ethan had arranged for a car because Lena's regular route home involved a subway transfer that Dr. Okafor had suggested avoiding for at least the first week. There were 4 of them in the car, Ethan in front, Maya and Lena in the back, Sophie in the middle seat that folded down because she'd asked to come, and he hadn't said no, and neither had Lena. And the city moved past the windows in the particular gold of a late afternoon in late spring. That specific New York light that makes the buildings look like they're generating warmth rather than absorbing it. Maya had her nose against the window. She'd been in the hospital for 29 days, and the city looked different the way things look different when you've been away from them. More itself, more detailed, more present in its own particular reality. "The setback on that one is wrong," she said, about a building they passed on the FDR. "The floor-to-floor height is too low for the window size. It's going to feel cramped from inside, even though it looks proportionate from the street." "It's been like this the whole drive," Sophie told Ethan from the middle seat, in a tone that conveyed both affectionate exasperation and genuine admiration. "Every building." "You've been doing it too," Maya said, without turning from the window. "I have not," Sophie said. "You said the pedestrian bridge we passed has weird energy," Maya said. "That's an architectural criticism." "That's a vibe assessment," Sophie said. "A vibe is an intuitive response to design decisions," Maya said. "It's the same thing with different vocabulary." Sophie looked at Ethan. He kept his face carefully neutral. Lena, beside Maya, made the sound again, the one that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite something else, and pressed her hand briefly over her mouth. The car pulled up to Lena's building in Red Hook, a converted industrial space, 3 floors, brick, the kind of building that had been a storage warehouse for 100 years before someone with good instincts had seen what it could be. He'd been here once, earlier in the week, to bring a bag of things Lena had asked for. He'd stood in the lobby and looked at the space and understood immediately what she'd seen in it. He got out and helped Maya, who accepted the help without the usual negotiation she had with physical assistants because she was tired in a new way and honest about it. Sophie carried the hospital bag. Lena unlocked the lobby door, and they went up in the small elevator that had been retrofitted into the original freight shaft, and Lena's apartment was on the 3rd floor, and it was the first time he'd seen the inside of it. It was not large. It was very much Lena. Everything in it had been thought about. Nothing was accidental. The proportions of the furniture relative to the space were worked out with the same precision she brought to her professional projects. There were drawings on the walls, some framed and some tacked directly to the brick. Her work and Maya's. On the far bookshelf, among other things, there was a photograph. He could see it from across the room. A younger Lena, 22 or so, on a roof somewhere, looking out at a city she was absolutely certain she was going to build something in. He did not go look at it closely. He didn't need to. Maya went directly to her room, which she hadn't seen in 29 days, and stood in the doorway looking at it with the expression of someone confirming that a thing still exists. Then she went in and sat on her bed and picked up a book that was on her nightstand where she'd left it. 10 minutes, Lena called from the hallway. Then rest. 20, Maya called back. 15, Lena said. A pause. Fine, Maya said. Sophie looked at this exchange with visible fascination, filed it, and went to the bookshelf to look at the drawings. He and Lena stood in the kitchen, which was small and well organized and had a window that looked onto an air shaft and then beyond it to a sliver of the water, just barely visible if you stood at the right angle. She put the kettle on. He leaned against the counter across from her. The Red Hook project, he said. I talked to 2 people this week. There are funding mechanisms for historic preservation that you probably haven't been able to access as a small firm. I can make some introductions if you want them. She looked at him. Introductions, she said. Not money, he said. Not my money. Grant programs and preservation societies, people who fund exactly this kind of project and who need an introduction to the right architect. He paused. I'm not doing the project. I'm opening a door. She was quiet for a moment, and he watched her run the calculation. The one she always ran, the one about whether accepting help changed what the thing was. Okay, she said. Yes, thank you. The kettle boiled. She made tea, 2 cups without asking if he wanted one, which was its own small recalibration, the same one he'd done with the mediocre hospital coffee. You build trust in small things. You build it in cups of tea made without asking, in blueberries remembered, in notes carried from one daughter to the other. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway. Maya fell asleep, she said. Like immediately. She was mid-sentence about the setback issue on the FDR building. Lena smiled. Actually smiled. The unguarded version, not quite the laugh, but in the same territory. She does that, she said. When she's really tired, she just goes. She was sitting up, Sophie said, with the repertorial precision of an eyewitness, and then she just stopped and was asleep. I'll go check on her, Lena said. She took her tea and went down the hallway. Sophie came into the kitchen and looked at Ethan. This is a good apartment, she said. It is, he said. She designed it herself, Sophie said, meaning the layout, the choices, the specific feeling of a space that had been thought about. I think so, he said. Yeah. Sophie looked toward the hallway where Lena had gone, then back at Ethan. Are you going to figure it out? She said. You and Lena. Eventually. He looked at his daughter. I don't know, he said. That's not a decision I make alone. I know, Sophie said, but do you want to? He thought about accuracy, about what he owed Sophie, which was the truth delivered in the right proportions. Yes, he said, but it's complicated and it takes time and there's no guaranteed outcome. Sophie nodded. Complicated, interesting, she said. Yeah, he said. Complicated, interesting. She picked up one of the teacups he hadn't taken and looked at the sliver of water through the airshaft window. I like her, Sophie said. Lena, she says exactly what she means. She does, he said. And Maya is... She stopped, turned the teacup. She's a lot, in a good way, like a lot of person in a compact format. That's accurate, he said. She's going to tell me when I'm wrong about things, Sophie said. I can already tell. Is that okay? Sophie considered it. It's good, actually, she said. People who tell you when you're wrong are useful. Most people just let you keep being wrong. She looked at him. You should work on that, by the way. On what? On telling people when they're wrong, she said. You're too diplomatic sometimes. You let things go that you should push on. He looked at his 9-year-old daughter. When did you develop this opinion? I've had it for a while, she said. I just hadn't found the right moment. She set the teacup down. The right moment is when things are changing. You push on old things when they're changing. He thought about that. That's a very specific philosophy, he said. I've been thinking about it, she said, and went back to the bookshelf. Lena returned to the kitchen. Maya was asleep properly, she said. She was going to sleep for a few hours at least. Sophie asked if she could look at the drawings on the walls, and Lena said yes, and Sophie drifted back to the living room, and Ethan and Lena stood in the small kitchen with the sliver of water visible through the window and the city doing its late afternoon thing beyond the brick. Thank you, Lena said. It came out simply, without the usual careful framing around it. For what specifically? He said. For the last 4 weeks, she said. For coming every day. For the blueberries and the engineering summaries and the job posting draft and the funding introductions and... She stopped. For Sophie. That was bringing Sophie when you did, the way you did. That mattered. Sophie brought herself, he said. I just drove. Don't do that, she said. Don't deflect the credit to someone else. That's a habit. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the directness she'd always had, the one that didn't let you get away with the easier version. "You're right," he said. "I'm working on that." "I know," she said. "I've noticed." They stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet that the apartment had when both daughters were in their respective orbits and not actively in conversation. It was the first time in 4 weeks that the quiet between them had felt like something other than managed space. It felt, he thought, like the natural quiet of two people who have stopped performing their positions relative to each other and started just being in the same room. "The thing you said in the hospital," Lena said, carefully. "About not yet being different from no." "I remember," he said. "I still mean it," she said. "The not yet part. There's a lot I need to figure out independently. About the business, and about what I want for myself that has nothing to do with you, and about—" She stopped. "I've been the only variable in my own equation for 9 years. I don't know how to add a variable without it changing everything." "I know," he said. "But," she said, and stopped again. "But?" he said. She looked at him with the expression that was the real one, the one underneath all the others, the one she'd been managing carefully, and was now, in this kitchen, in this late afternoon light, allowing to be on her face without correction. "But I noticed that every day for 4 weeks you brought fresh blueberries," she said, "and that you remembered what I said about frozen versus fresh on the first night, and that you texted me at 11 p.m. 2 Tuesdays ago because you'd found a paper on the second drug and wanted me to have it before the morning appointment." She looked at her teacup. "And that you drafted the job posting, and it was better than what I would have written. And you didn't tell me that. You just asked me what I thought of it, and let me arrive at that conclusion myself." She looked up. "I noticed those things. I'm being accurate about noticing them." He held her gaze. He did not fill the silence. He'd learned. "Okay," she said. "That's all I wanted to say," and picked up her tea. He picked up his. They drank in the kitchen with the sliver of water through the window, and Sophie could be heard in the other room having a quiet conversation with herself about which of the drawings she would want to ask Maya about when she woke up. And somewhere down the hall, Maya was sleeping in her own bed for the first time in 29 days. And the city outside was doing what it always did. Going on, enormous and indifferent, and also, if you knew how to read it, full of the specific proof that things continued, that they kept moving and building and connecting, that the space between buildings was structural too, and that what looked like a gap was sometimes exactly what was holding everything up. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in July, the 4 of them stood at the edge of the Red Hook Community Center site. Maya had counted the days from discharge with the patience of someone who has learned that some timelines are not negotiable. And on the morning of the 43rd day, she'd presented Dr. Okafor with a typed argument for why the 6-week restriction had been met, which Dr. Okafor had read with what appeared to be suppressed amusement before signing the relevant form. The building was a former warehouse on a corner lot 2 blocks from the water. The renovation was in early stages. The bones of it were being assessed, the historical elements identified and protected. The new design layered in around the original structure with the precision that was Lena's particular professional signature. Maya walked the perimeter with Lena, the 2 of them talking in the low, technical, intensely focused way they had when they were both fully engaged with a structural problem. And Sophie walked beside Ethan and looked at the building with the urban planning book under her arm. Maya had returned it, as promised, and Sophie had brought it today because there was a chapter on adaptive reuse that she wanted to look at in context. He watched Lena and Maya move around the corner of the building, Lena pointing at something in the original brickwork, and Maya leaning in to look. And he thought about a conversation on a rooftop in Harlem 12 years ago, and a phrase that had ended up in a design document, and a woman who had built a life from the materials available to her, and a child who had designed a better hospital from her hospital bed. He thought about a 45-minute cab ride and a rooftop restaurant, and the particular quality of air just before something changes. He thought about what it costs to build something, really build it, not just assemble it, not just scale it up, but build it from the actual materials of a life, from the things that resist and break and require more than you thought you had. He'd spent 12 years learning that about companies. He understood now, only just beginning to learn it about the other kind. Sophie said, beside him, "The east wall has a crack in the foundation." He looked at the east wall. She was right. How did you see that? Maya pointed it out when we came in, she said. I've been looking at it since. What do you think causes it? Differential settlement, Sophie said immediately, then looked slightly surprised at herself. I've been reading ahead in the book, she added, without apology. It's a good thing to read ahead, he said. Maya says the same thing, she said. Then more quietly. She texts me. Did you know that? We've been texting since the hospital. She explains building things, and I explain other things. What other things? Things she hasn't read yet, Sophie said. She hasn't read much fiction. I've been sending her recommendations. She paused. She reads them and then sends me analyses of the narrative structure. It's very Maya. He looked at his daughter. He thought about two children, each operating at a frequency most people couldn't hear, finding each other across a set of circumstances nobody would have designed. He thought about the things you can't plan and the things you can't predict and the ways that life occasionally produces, out of its particular chaos, something that is exactly right in ways you didn't know you needed. He wasn't going to call it fate. He wasn't going to dress it up in the language of things being meant. It wasn't that. It was just people making choices, and sometimes the choices that seemed like the worst ones turned out to be load-bearing in ways you couldn't see until you were standing on the other side of them. He had walked away from something at 22 because he was afraid that love would hold him in place. He'd been wrong about what love was. Love was not an anchor. He understood that now, standing on a construction site in Red Hook on a July morning, watching one daughter read a book and watching another daughter walk the perimeter of a building with the woman who had raised her. Love was not an anchor. Love was the thing that told you where to put the load-bearing walls. Maya came back around the corner with Lena, and Maya was talking already before she fully came into view, something about the window placement on the north elevation, and Lena was listening and responding, and the two of them moved like two parts of a system that had been calibrated over 9 years into something functional and solid, and also, undeniably, beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when they work. Lena looked up and found him across the site. The complicated expression, which over 6 weeks had gradually simplified, had simplified again this morning into something cleaner, still layered, still not simple, because nothing about her was simple, and nothing about this was simple, and that was fine. That was actually what made it real. But underneath the layers, something had steadied. She looked at him. He looked at her. Sophie was beside him reading about differential settlement. Maya was behind Lena explaining about north elevation windows. He had not fixed the 10 years. He was not going to fix them. You didn't fix the years you'd missed. You couldn't renovate a building that had already been built without you. You could only work with the structure as it stood and put the new elements in carefully and make sure the load was properly distributed. He understood that. He was going to keep understanding it for the rest of his life. But he was here. He was here on a Saturday in July, with fresh blueberries in the bag he'd brought because Maya would want them after the site visit, and Sophie would eat approximately half of them on the way home, and Lena would take a few without commenting, and they would run out before they got back to the car, and he would go get more because that was just how it went now. That was the texture of it. That was the ordinary, imperfect, irreplaceable texture of showing up. He had built a $4 billion company, and it had been the work of his life, and it was real, and it mattered, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. But this was the work of his life too, this and also that. Both things in the same life, which turned out to be large enough to hold them if you were willing to stop treating it like a zero-sum equation. He was willing. He was learning. Maya reached him and looked into the bag and found the blueberries and said, without preamble, "The north elevation has a window placement problem." "Tell me," he said. She did. He listened. Sophie leaned over to look at the building. Lena stood a few feet away, watching all of them with the expression that had steadied, and the morning was warm and the water was visible 2 blocks down, and the city went on being itself all around them, enormous and indifferent, and also, if you knew how to read it, if you'd learned what you were actually looking at, full of people who had built things from the materials available to them, and kept building, and were still here. That was the story. Not the $1 billion, not the company, not the rooftop restaurant or the blind date or the 10 years of silence or any of the dramatic events that had cracked things open. The story was the blueberries, the plastic chair, the note in Sophie's small handwriting, folded in a pocket and carried to a hospital bed. The draft of a job posting. The crack in the east wall that someone noticed because someone else had pointed it out. The slow, imperfect daily work of being present in the lives of people who needed you to be there. That was what Ethan Callaway had spent 12 years trying to build and had been looking in entirely the wrong place to find. He had it now. He was going to keep it.